Claire, please say something in the chat just so I know something's happening here. I always get a message when I start the stream. It says working on your live stream, but then I listen back in the replay and it's already been going for 20 seconds and I'm coughing and spluttering and, getting ready to start. But anyway, enough of that. So the Boxing Squared live stream back for another week. It's a lot going on, a lot happening in heavyweight boxing at the moment. It feels like we're starting to really get the gears turning on the year for the heavyweight division. It's not all going to be the sort of fights that we want all the time, and we've got UK Rob Boxing in the chat. That's Rob from Mixed Combat Radio. Great channel, great live streams. Do subscribe to them if you haven't already done so. So a big live show, a number of things that I wanted to touch on. So we've got Right Hook Boxing, Unga and Scott 70 all in the building along with Adam Fahey. So there's a whole bundle of things going on, and I was writing a list about an hour or so ago, and literally I've got a dozen things on my list, and then I sort of had a quick look around and I've seen a few other things that I did want to start the stream with, things that have just sort of popped up. We've got Andy Lee, Tyson Fury's assistant trainer, cousin, big part of the team for Team Fury. He's spoken to Boxing Social, and there is an article up on Metro, and I'll get to a couple of the comments. Fury essentially sending out false flags during training camp. And when there was some injury stuff that came out, and Eddie Hearn was talking about, he had heard that Tyson Fury hadn't had a good camp. I said at the time, Tyson Fury could be the guy that's behind these rumors, because that's a very Tyson Fury thing to do. And so it's proven to be. And there were a few things during camp that Sugar Hill Stewart said, look, there were a few things that Tyson Fury was sort of battling with at different points, sore shoulder at one point, elbow, etc., ankle. But Tyson Fury hamming it up at different points. So we'll get to that. Also, Deontay Wilder is open to the offer from George Foreman to train him, or at least, give some advice, or whatever the sort of arrangement will end up being. So the Boxing Voice has done a piece on that. And I actually spoke about the offer of training from the likes of Foreman, Mayweather, and also Antonio Tarver in a piece that I did on Patreon, because I sort of look at this as, is it too many Chiefs and not enough Indians with the Wilder camp already, and is adding another voice to what is basically going to be the existing team? Does that just complicate matters further? But we can talk about that. And a whole bundle of fights have been announced. We've got some decent heavyweight fights this weekend, including one which is going to be down in Australia, Dempsey McKean versus Johnny Rice. I'm actually really looking forward to that one. I know that video that I did on that fight, the preview, and I had both fighters who'd actually provided me a video clip, didn't get a bundle of views, and that can often be the case with some of these more niche fights that draw a little less interest. But to me, that was probably the best video that I think I've done in the last week or two, and it's probably got the least views. But if you haven't seen that one, check that out, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. You've got the Adam Kovnatsky card as well, bundle of heavyweight fights, and then other bits and pieces that have been announced. Trevor Bryan and Manuel Charr, will they get it on? Purse bid done. Andy Ruiz Jr. hinting at an announcement again. Matchroom loses Murat Gassiev. Ajit Kabiel fight announcement. Oscar Rivas fight announcement. And what else have I got on my list? Yeah, Joseph Parker, maybe a potential fight in New Zealand mid-year. And I wonder with some of that, because there's been some musings from, different fans about what sort of arrangement will that actually take on, regardless of the opponent, because of the whole sort of tie-in with DAZN. And we can talk about that, because I think it really depends some of what happens next, and with Joseph Parker's next fight. What was the deal that he signed with Matchroom for this first 3-fight deal? This would be the third of it. I'll get back to the chat here, because I've been on Microsoft Word just listing off a few things. So chat is really starting to go crazy already, so I'll try to keep up as best as possible. I might have to skip over a few things, and someone said only 6 likes so far. Quite a few people in the building, 39. If you can smash that like button, it would be much appreciated. So where were we? So we've got Siggy from Demdar Hillsman, love from Jerusalem. Andre Ruyen, hi from Cape Town, South Africa. So we've got a real international flavour all over the world here. So hello to Siggy and Andre from Jerusalem and South Africa, respectively. David is in the chat. It's going well, David. Thanks for asking. Paul says, morning boxing squared. Well, it's morning here. So the UK that I take it there, Paul. Marcus says, good morning from Norway. Litoy says, what up boxing squared. Right Hook Boxing saying hello to everyone else in the chat here. I can't read that name, but it says hello from Pakistan. Thank you for joining us here. Reality's Voice, well, hello. It's a lot of people joining the chat, so thank you very much. So I'll start on my list, and I'll try and get down the list a bit more. It's getting a bit hard to say hello to everyone, but wherever you are right now, if you join the chat, thank you for coming on board for another Boxing Squared live stream every Friday, 9:30 New Zealand time. Well, I say 9:30, and I always intend it to be 9:30, but whatever happens, it always ends up being a few minutes late. Just the setup and other bits and pieces conspires against me, but we're here, so that's the main thing. So hello to you if you've said hello to me. I'll try to get into the first topic and keep up with the chat because it just moves so quickly. But Tyson Fury throwing out a few false flags, as has been revealed by Andy Lee to Boxing Social, in a piece that's appeared on Metro, which is obviously a matcher from that. It says there was a couple of days where Tyson messed around to see if leaks would happen. He feigned injury or pretended to limp after a sparring session to see what would happen. That's the type of level of deviousness you're dealing with him. Inside his own training camp, he'll put on a show and play act to see if anyone talks outside the camp. He absolutely performed perfectly in training and worked extremely hard. People see this larger-than-life character, but when it comes to the training, he works extremely hard. He's very focused and serious about what he does. Stuck to his diet, yada, yada, yada. But some of that stuff from Andy Lee, well, we did see some of that sort of leak out, that there were potentially some concerns, that he was injured, that the camp hadn't been going well, and Eddie Hearn was one of these guys that it obviously got back to. So, yeah, Tyson Fury, I mean, I think a lot of us were speculating at the time, was he the source of the rumours? But obviously it could have well been for some of them. And he would have wanted some of that to get back to Deontay Wilder, the old psychological warfare. So I caught that an hour or two ago on that Metro story, and I had to have a chuckle, and I thought, that's very classic Tyson Fury. And just imagine what he's going to have planned for Fury Wilder 3. So much to work with now after the fight with some of the comments that were made by Deontay Wilder. It's going to be crazy into the build-up to the third fight. And it's going to be interesting what sort of level of interest are fans going to have. And I think it's one of these sort of situations that, while the second fight was so definitive, the fact there is this rematch, it's happening, the closer the fight gets, I mean, most boxing fans, especially hardcore boxing fans, you end up warming up to it a bit more than you actually think, and during fight week you start to get G'd up for it, and the potential storylines, the ramifications, and you starts to get the blood pumping, and obviously you get to fight night and it's about to boil over. And that's what happened with the second fight. There was part of me ahead of that rematch that for a decent stretch of the promotion, it just kind of felt like it was sort of just ambling along a little bit. But the closer it got, and then they had a big promotional push, started to get me excited about the second fight. And it's not that I didn't want to see it or anything like that. It's just, I think the whole year gap from the first fight to the second fight, I was finding it hard to, get up for the sort of excitement levels that I was expecting I should have. But ultimately I did have, especially in the final few weeks of the build-up. Okay, so Isabella says, I can't believe George Groves is trying to kick his Englishman Fury under the bus for the cheating glove scandal. I haven't seen what Groves has said, but I have seen, there's all manner of things on the internet right now. People saying that the gloves were tampered with, and I'm even seeing people saying that Tyson Fury spiked Deontay Wilder's water or something like that. I mean, some of this is going beyond the pale, and I've also seen a whole bunch of videos that debunk, the whole gloves thing. I mean, my sort of situation, as I said last week in the stream, the Nevada State Athletic Commission, they were there. They were there for the wrapping, for the gloves going on, as was representatives from Team Deontay Wilder. So I would have thought both, the commission and Wilder's team, if anything was going awry, they should have been picking that up. And from what we know, everything was signed off as hunky-dory. So I mean, I've sort of moved past that. I'm not getting sort of down into the gutter on that one. I think it is a bit of a red herring in my own personal view. But if someone wants to think that the gloves were tampered with, well, whatever. So Right Hook Boxing says, hit the like button. Yes, please. Ra Hoa says, good morning from Greenland. Oops, I meant Mars. Baboon Boxing with the gloves and the thumbs up. That's a good sign, I think. Siggy says, that's a real trick. Heel palm strike from a giant. Paul Lindley says, I wonder what the excuses they'll come out with next time Fury smashes him. Well, I guess for some fans and Deontay Wilder's hardcore fans, if they keep coming out with excuses, and, at least Deontay Wilder hasn't at this point, for the gloves and other bits and pieces, gone into it, because I think that would really sort of set the issue on fire, and it would sort of come up another level. And I think at this point, with some of the stuff that he's already said, he's walking a bit of a tight rope on the PR front. But in terms of that third fight, some of this, it may come up, and there could be some people that really want to make it an issue as part of the build-up. And I guess maybe for Deontay Wilder, he may actually look at some of these videos and some of what's being said. Maybe he will believe it, but now that he's obviously trying to move to the third fight and get out from the PR nightmare that he sort of set on, on himself, even if he does believe it and he thinks that's an issue, I don't think he's going to say anything in public at this point. So Paul Lindley says, spaghetti hoop man. Speak Your Mind Sports TV, what up Boxing Squared, what up chat. And so if you haven't followed Speak Your Mind Sports TV, another channel that does very good live stream shows, not just boxing, more general sports too, but a big part is boxing. Siggy says, yeah, I'm rolling around that Money Mayweather will help out Wilder. Woe be gone. Adam Fahey says, gloves chat is rubbish. I actually saw Regis Prograis come out with a tweet on that earlier in the week, and he was just like, man, I probably can't repeat word for word what he said, but he said, people don't know anything about boxing. L-Dog says, Tyson Fury put explosives in his gloves. Baboon Boxing, have you ever seen worse losers than Team Wilder? They're acting like children. Siggy says, that's why they need Mayweather. I guess that sort of brings me to my second topic, which was about help, because it's clear that for the third fight, they can't do what they did for the first two fights, which the second fight plan was do the first fight plan better. They didn't want to make any adjustments, just do it better. And they can't rely on that, because we saw Tyson Fury out of the two was the only one that really made any adjustments. And the reason Wilder looked worse in the second fight was because of the adjustments. So Tyson Fury has proved he can work off the back foot and coming forward. So what does Deontay Wilder do? And part of that has to be a look at the structure, the team setup, etc. What's happening? We've heard Mark Breland is going to be sort of sticking around, etc. Obviously, JD's at this point, there's nothing to suggest he's going. I did see a Boxing Voice interview a week or so, maybe it was less than that, after the fight, and Ronnie Shields was on there talking about the sort of setup. There's too many voices, and it's not just Breland and Dees, sort of shouting and barking out orders and other bits and pieces. He said there's a lot of people in there giving a lot of advice, and he doesn't see a lot of it sort of translating into an in-ring performance by Deontay Wilder. But this offer from, say, Floyd Mayweather, this offer from Antonio Tarver, and now George Foreman, and the Boxing Voice is saying that Deontay Wilder's team, Deontay Wilder is at least willing to consider the help of offer, from George Foreman. But if he does come in, does that actually add a benefit? Because if there's no other changes in terms of the way that they do things, if Foreman's there for any length of time, is that just another voice on the pile? I mean, one of the concerns I would have is if you just have too many people giving advice, Deontay Wilder being pushed and pulled all over the place. I know JD's tried to explain the setup as a, sort of football style setup, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator and such, and that they all had different roles to play. But is there just too many voices, and is that working at the moment for Deontay Wilder? It's a question. And if you bring someone else in, is that going to actually complicate matters further? Yeah, I wonder about that. I mean, unless they're actually willing to shake things up, which, I don't know. Are they? I mean, that's a big question. Okay, getting back to the chat here. So what I'm going to try to do, because I always get 20, 30 minutes behind in the chat, so what's happening live doesn't reflect what I'm talking about. So I'm going to try keep up with the chat. So I can't get to every comment, but try to catch me with a question or something as I'm going. So that's the way that I'm going to do it. So if I can't get to your question or a comment or address it, just try to drop it again, but don't put the same comment 50 times, quickly or something like that. Try to catch me in between topics. Like now is a good time if you want to ask a question. So UK Rob Boxing, Foreman the puncher lost to the smarter boxer and is the man to teach the puncher the best to beat the smart boxer. Pointless. But I'm sure through the benefit of his experience, he might be able to convey something. Remembering that's maybe a good example in terms of, obviously Ali beating Foreman. Maybe there is something, at least on the mental and psychological side, dealing with the loss and coming back from it that Foreman can impart to Deontay Wilder. Maybe it's not all going to be technical sort of stuff, and I'm sure that there are areas that Foreman could help in, but maybe it is more the sort of dealing with the loss, in the aftermath of a big fight. Mr. Boxing says, please get a picture on your screen, and Wilder needs Lennox Lewis's help. Yeah, I actually had the chat running on the screen last year, but for whatever reason, something's happened with my software. I don't know what's happened. I've got the thing, the chat box, and it says that it's on the screen, but I can't see it. I don't know if you can see that little green box that I've just put up on the screen. It says it's there, so the chat should be rolling. No idea what's happening. So Chad says, Chur from Perth. Scott 70 says Foreman adds shock value and would help sell the third fight. Yeah, I mean, if they got Mayweather, in there as well, I mean, imagine that. That would be something that adds a little bit of spice too. But I was thinking about the whole Floyd Mayweather coming in. I mean, is he going to be spending any length of time in Alabama, or is Deontay Wilder, would he have to go to him? Is it more for show, a few days or a few sessions, something like that, as opposed to, really sort of having weeks or months worth of sort of training with Floyd Mayweather? Because, I mean, who knows what his schedule is? He's not going to just be staying in Vegas or something like that. John says, good morning, Boxing Squared. How are you today? Well, it's coming up 10 o'clock. I'm okay, a little bit tired. It's been a busy couple of weeks since this result from the Fury fight. There's been a real aftermath of coverage and other bits and pieces. But in general, the heavyweight division, a lot of news. And especially this week, fights being announced, I think 3 or 4, and other bits and pieces floating around. James says, Harry Potter couldn't teach that big dosser enough tricks to beat the Gypsy King. Speak Your Mind Sports TV. The only help Wilder could get in his corner to win is a real-life wizard. That way he can conjure up a spell and zap that sweet science into Wilder. Other than that, Wilder gets whipped again. Unger says, Foreman was mentally shot after that loss, hit major depression. He couldn't come to terms with it. It's more the mental side he helped with. Yeah, I mean, that's what I was sort of thinking. I mean, in terms of being a master technician, George Foreman was not. But, I mean, there could be something that he can teach. I mean, because George Foreman has sort of, in his later life, become a motivational speaker and other bits and pieces. Maybe there's something that he can help with. If anything, as someone just alluded to before, it could add a bit of interest in terms of the story for the third fight, which we all know is coming now, and probably needs a few more storylines to get people a bit interested, given the definitive result of the second fight. Rahowa says, losing to Fury ×3 doesn't mean Wilder can't be in good fights versus top contenders, but Fury winning the third fight isn't a done deal. Stranger things have happened. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can completely write Wilder off. Obviously, in any fight with his power, his punching power, if he does land and really hits the target, he can be in any fight, and he's proven that throughout his career. And Unger says, you beat me to it, Squared. All things awesome gaming, Boxing Squared. Even as Wilder is battered again, I still hope to see Wilder versus AJ White, Usyk, Ruiz, but I worry he will retire. What are your thoughts? I guess it depends on the third fight to some extent. I mean, some people will think it's going to be a cash out, but I mean, he's talked about fighting till 40, but sometimes circumstances can dictate what happens with a heavyweight's career. If he feels he's got nothing left to he can't get sort of up mentally again for big fights after losing to Fury a third time, if that happened, maybe he could retire, walk off into the sunset with another $20+ million. I mean, after these couple of fights, the first two, he's made some pretty decent bank. Peter Burris says Fury should retire before he loses. Well, if he retired now, that would sort of rob us as fans, I believe, of the sort of fight, that, at least one more fight that we want to see, regardless of undisputed. If Joshua, say, lost to Pulev, or Joshua didn't have a belt when he fought Fury, that's kind of one of those fights we need to see. I mean, there's a whole argument that no one has separated themselves to the point where they can say that they are the best of their generation, and there's some fights on the table. If they don't happen, there's always a question. I think Fury's nudging ahead at this point, Vladimir Klitschko, Deontay Wilder, and if he beats Joshua, well, there's a great argument to say that is, generational sort of talent and, all-time great status for Tyson Fury. But obviously, you can't sort of bank on or sit on what you've done so far, and if he has a couple more fights and that ends up being Joshua, Wilder, maybe even a Dillian White, and if he wins them all, ends up being a pretty great resume. Skater says Mayweather doesn't do heavyweights, he just wants a headline. Well, that's, part of me sort of wondered that as well. Adam Fahey says Fury's got 3 fights left, Wilder 3, AJ 2, and will retire undefeated. If he beats Anthony Joshua in the first fight, even if there was a contracted rematch, I could see him retiring. Sort of depends. I mean, I could totally see the same cycle happening again, that he might sort of go away, retire, and, a couple of years out of the sport, but then get the itch again. I mean, the top-ranked president, he was saying that, he sort of feels that, people say they want to retire, they feel like they're done, but, are they really done sometimes? Plenty of examples of guys who've come back. Sean says, hey Boxing Squared, if the undisputed fight happens in December as Hearn wants, then what next for Usyk? Could he fight Parker, White, or rematch Hunter? It's going to be interesting to hear a bit more of an explanation of, he's the WBO mandatory, and obviously the WBO has already called that fight. So if Joshua holds on to the belt, there must have been some sort of deal for step aside, and it'd be good to get a bit of clarity on what's really going on there. So, I mean, who knows what is actually happening with the behind the scenes, and if he's getting paid millions in step aside. But in terms of if he beats Chisora, I mean, I could see him having a fight with Joseph Parker. I could see him having a number of fights, but it kind of depends at least on some of the fights in the mid-year. I think that's going to dictate what happens at the end of the year. So it's hard to sort of put these things out. I mean, maybe they could build towards a Hunter rematch. You mentioned his name there. I mean, that was a decent fight at the cruiserweight, and maybe they could have another good fight at heavyweight. Maybe some people would actually warm up to Hunter given some of his performances. Anthony says it'll be interesting if other opponents emulate Fury getting in and dirty with Wilder. Big punches would get Wilder out of there sooner. Yeah, but I mean, it's easy to say that, harder to do. I mean, remembering there's not too many guys that are 6'9", moving around like a gazelle, like a Tyson Fury. He's got a bigger reach advantage and a few other things over Deontay Wilder. Other boxers don't. Baboon Boxing says Wilder looked boxing scared in the ring. Maybe some counselling, Big George would help. Possibly, yeah. Shabazz says that Fury didn't want the AJ fight. Won't happen. I hope it does. If it does manage to come off, if there is an undisputed at some point, I mean, I don't really mind who's in the undisputed fight. I just want to see one happen. It's been a generation, effectively, since one happened. It'd be great to see it. So I'm starting to fall behind in the chat, so I'll just try to catch up here. So don't be offended if I haven't come to your comment. You can just drop it again. So James says Fury is going to right now, but you can't claim credit for beating AJ White and Usyk by beating Wilder. Yeah, I mean, we need to see some of these fights. I mean, if Fury fought Joshua but then didn't fight White or Usyk, I mean, I could live with that. But I think at least because we've kind of had it at least the last couple of years. There's 3 that have sort of been at the top in terms of fans' minds. I mean, there's been some that have come and go. Remember back in 2017, Joseph Parker was seen as a dark horse. Andy Ruiz was obviously in the conversation last year, but now it's sort of come back to those 3. Deontay Wilder's taken a loss to Fury. We'll see what happens in the 3rd fight. But yeah, I mean, if he doesn't get all those fights in, I don't mind so much, but he at least needs to have that Joshua fight, I think, for fans. Michael J says, I'm already looking forward to Fury Wilder 3 press tour. I expect Fury to attend the first press conference wearing some very heavy costume. Yeah, I mean, I said somewhere else that I could expect him to be putting in an order for the exact same costume, but maybe getting it fitted and slightly tailored differently because he's at different dimensions to Wilder. Totally see him wearing that to the first press conference, or coming out in some way in some of the events that would happen through the build-up, possibly even in fight week, to troll Deontay Wilder. That would be some epic psychological warfare. Ryan says, do you think a matchroom card with Parker in New Zealand could kickstart a boxing movement off? Because when I lived in New Zealand, you guys were passionate for your sport, but not so much boxing in my experience. I think part of that is because boxing sort of was just in a decline over decades, and effectively you only have a few fighters at any one time that you can really cheer for. I mean, I guess it helps now in terms of combat sport in New Zealand. You've got the UFC and you've got some New Zealanders that are starting to sort of make some noise on the sort of world stage. And I think a lot of people who maybe at one time supported boxing sort of went over to MMA and never came back either. But a matchroom card with Parker in New Zealand, would it kickstart anything? Nah. I mean, Parker was doing events galore during, his sort of early years. Most of them pay-per-view events, a lot of them very well hyped. But the thing is, once someone starts losing, it does kill the momentum. I mean, I know this might be a bit of a controversial take for some very hardcore Joseph Parker supporters, and I'm a big Parker fan, as most of you will know. But his popularity is not what it once was. I mean, there was a massive hype train behind Joseph Parker coming up, and it's I don't want to say it's been derailed, but a couple of losses and then 3 consecutive tune-ups where he's been, against not very interesting opponents. The actual support and buzz for him is nowhere close to what it used to be. I mean, as soon as he gets back to the sort of world stage in a fight people care about, you'll see people coming back and watching those fights and getting interested again. But at the moment, his support has sort of come off the highs that it was back in 2016, 2017. I think that's just a reality. Losses and, people like winners, and if you lose, people walk away and people are doubting him. People don't want to pay $40, $50 for tune-up fights. I mean, that card was $40 for New Zealanders last week. I mean, I guarantee they're doing a lot less buys now than they were, prior to Joseph Parker getting the title, when he was having tune-ups basically versus journeyman, and that was pay-per-view in New Zealand. And but it was at that point where a lot of casual fans didn't really know the heavyweight division, didn't know it well, and they were buying up whatever they were sold by David Higgins, that someone like a Daniel Martz, who was 16-2, was a credible opponent, that the cost of the pay-per-view was funding Joseph Parker's journey. But a matchroom card, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's another event if it comes here. Hopefully it's going to be a good opponent. I mean, that's part of the issue now. I mean, I think for boxing fans, Joseph Parker fans, you want to see him in a good fight. Casual fans, they may not be as fussed anymore, and those who've, paid for it before will be a bit more sort of wise after having seen Parker at the elite level. They know that some of the guys that he's been fighting are not the sort of top guys anymore. I'll get to... because there's been some talk about Joseph Parker having a fight in New Zealand mid-year, and that, as you allude to, could have been a matchroom card. But one of the things is, because I did read David Higgins say that Sky, is still the broadcast partner, and with DAZN looking to expand to 200 countries, and New Zealand would be one of them, does make me wonder, what is the actual arrangement? What's the setup for Joseph Parker and his contract and other bits and pieces? Because if you end up having, say just the matchroom content come over, but then you're going to have a guy who's a matchroom fighter on pay-per-view, it kind of defeats the purpose of what the app was set out to do. But there's lots of permutations, and I was talking to Adam Fahey, who's been in the chat here earlier in sort of a conversation via Twitter. I wondered if some of what Parker's current deal, some of what that is based upon is obviously them doing pay-per-views in New Zealand. Maybe long-term, that's not going to be the case in terms of a next deal, but it might be a part of this deal, that the rights for New Zealand fights go up for, bidding, and it's going to be pay-per-view, because that's some of the way that they're going to recoup what's on Joseph Parker's contract. Remembering, he's had fights against Alex Leopai and Shondell Winters. They'll be very, very expensive tune-up fights for Matchroom USA and DAZN. Parker getting good money for pretty average fights, so they're going to want to make some money back off him. So that's why I think the third one is going to be a pay-per-view in New Zealand, and it'll $40 or $50, fleece the fans again. So Rohoa says, what's your problem with Fury? Okay, I missed out on that conversation. Falling behind in the chat again. I shall try to keep up. It is increasingly hard. Daniel Ross says, if Wilder wins the rubber match and gets the belt back, we are not back to square one. I'm nervous that Wilder manages to land and the division is locked up again. It's always a risk. Deontay Wilder has power, and if he comes up with some adjustments, or even I don't want to say a lucky punch, because he has found the target numerous times in his career, including that first fight. But I'm not sure I want to see Wilder Fury 4. I think there's 3 fights at this point feels like it would be enough. So if he does win, I don't know what's going to happen. We'd have to sort of cross that bridge when we come to it. Sizzler says, morning from the UK. God of War says, DAZN 200 countries now. Why not have a bout in New Zealand or Australia? Yeah, I mean, there's that case to say, yeah, have a fight here, have a local fighter, but it's got to be a good card. I mean, why have cards for the sake of having cards? Because if Joseph Parker's not in with anyone interesting, it's not necessarily going to, do much for DAZN subscribers from New Zealand, I think. I think it's a reality that, his star power has come off what it was. He's not the draw that he once was. And I'm not saying that he can't, sell out a good crowd and that sort of thing. But in terms of the level and the interest in his career, it's not as high as it once was. And that's just kind of, a couple of losses, and then you don't fight anyone for 18 months who's, interesting to watch. It's going to happen. Marcus says, if Usyk is outclassing Chisora, do you think he'll be avoided? Well, I mean, I'm picking that Alexander Usyk will outclass Derek Chisora. I don't think people will avoid Alexander Usyk, because he will still be seen, like Michael Hunter is to some extent, as a former cruiserweight. But the thing is, someone like Usyk to Chisora, that is Chisora's kryptonite movement. I mean, people forget the Senagashi fight where he just couldn't cut off the ring, couldn't deal with the movement, and it was a terrible looking fight. He's got a huge amount of buzz off beating a faded Spilka and a faded David Price. I think Chisora is an opponent Usyk's going to look forward to facing. And if he does win, that's going to get a lot of fans on board. And if he looks really good, sort of, think back to that fight against Murat Gassiev. If it's a performance similar to that, a lot of people will be converted, because there's a lot of doubters right now. All Things Awesome Gaming, Boxing Squared. Do you find it strange Eddie Hearn will constantly mention Joshua's IBO belt and say he has 4 belts, but ignore the ring and lineal status and belittle Fury's? I'm not sure what that last bit is. Is that one belt? The IBO, I don't recognize it. It's not a major belt. When people, I have a lot of people always coming to the channel trying to correct me. Joshua's got 4 belts. He's got 3 major belts. The IBO is not a recognized in terms of the big sanctioning bodies. It is what it is. It's sort of that second tier sort of, title. And they've got aspirations to be a major sanctioning body. But I mean, how many more do we actually need being recognized at the top level? I mean, it's 4 already feels ridiculous enough. Unga says Usyk schooling Chisora won't change a thing. Adam says Usyk will outclass Chisora. L-Dog says Usyk will stop Chisora late, in my opinion. Siggy says, the beautiful thing about boxing is fighter training paradigm. Ben Davis and Sugar Hill, it's like life. You got to surround yourself with good people. Yeah, good comment. I'll try to catch up on the the chat here, so if I'm missing a comment, apologies. We've got to get on to the next subject as well, but I'll just get to a couple of comments. We'll start with Crazy D3 first, who's just dropped a super chat. Thank you for that. Do you think Hemi Ahil should fight in the USA or UK for more exposure? From his highlights, he looks entertaining. Yeah, he is an entertaining fighter. He's a pocket rocker, good power. That knockout over Ali Qaiden in Saudi Arabia last year, very good work. He has been fighting in the United States. He's with Ludabella. He was on that card in Utah. I'm just trying to think who he was fighting. Might have been Ed Fountain. But yeah, he's had a couple of good-looking wins. But yeah, I sort of feel like there's a few New Zealand heavyweights below Parker, and Parker sort of hogs up all the headlines, but guys like Junior Farr, Hemi Ahil, there's also Patrick Mailata. He's just signed on with Epic Sports and Entertainment. That's the guys that co-promote Kubrat Pulev. That's John Worth and Ivalo Gotsev. And then there's another guy, Toa Luteli. It sort of feels like most of those guys are treading water at the moment, trying to build records, but not necessarily in great fights. And I think Ahil is ready for bigger fights, but is he going to get matched tougher? I mean, I think people, with Ahil especially, people forget that he had a couple of years out of the ring because of management issues and promoter issues, that sort of stuff. Not exactly sure of all the circumstances, but he had a very quiet period because of it. He does have good power, but, I think ultimately being 6 foot, he is undersized, and against certain heavyweights, he's going to find it tough. But he can be in some fun fights if they match him right, and, I think people will like him if he can get more exposure. But he has been fighting in the USA, but I guess, in terms of his deal, whatever the length of it is at the moment, I'm not sure. But he needs some more fights. Him and Junior Farr need to be in some more fights. At the moment, they've sort of been 2 fights a year, 3 fights, not really interesting competition. We need to see them in better fights. So Ryan says, my DAZN in Germany used to have the NRL on it, so if DAZN go aggressive with the rights for the NRL in New Zealand, it will be an instant hit. Yeah, I guess it'll be interesting with other peripheral sports for DAZN, because I know that they're, with this whole worldwide expansion, sort of boxing is one of their sort of or sort of pillars, I should say, that they're sort of looking to sort of sell it and then try to pick up other local rights wherever they are along the way. But some of them have just, I know rugby's and cricket in New Zealand's just been wrapped up, and it's not all going to Sky Sports either. There's some of the cricket has been picked up by Spark Sport. I know Spark Sport has got some Formula One and I think some Premier League too. There's a few different outfits that, some of the sports rights are starting to get a bit fractured. So they'll need to pick up something, because the boxing market in terms of the fandom in New Zealand, I would say, the biggest number of the boxing fans are sort of what you'd sort of either call hardcore, sort of casual, or hardcore casuals, where they just watch a couple of big fights a year. They kind of know what's going on, but there's a much smaller number that follow boxing day to day with news and other bits and pieces, or week to week. Very, very much smaller, and DAZN won't be able to bank on that in New Zealand to drive subscriptions. And I'm not sure if the odd Joseph Parker fight 2 or 3 fights a year is going to really do it either. They need more rights. That's going to be a case that, or situation they have to deal with all over the world. They'll have to pick up all sorts of rights. But I just wonder what sort of war chest that they've got to actually do some of this. They're going to need other investment, because the current owners of DAZN, it's not a bottomless pit, and they're out to make money in the end. But I'll be interested to see what the offering is and the price point, knowing that the price point after a year or so is probably going to double, like the American example. But yeah, if we end up getting a whole bunch of good quality fights in other sports, I'll certainly be interested in getting it in New Zealand. But if there's not much there, it's kind of one of the reasons that I haven't got Spark Sport. Like they had the Rugby World Cup, for example, and I bought the tournament pass and also got some free access to for a week or two to have a look around what they had. It just wasn't enough there to keep me interested, and I think it was $20 a month for that, and it was like, man, it's just not enough there to me justify the cost. And I had Sky Sports New Zealand, because got rid of the old TV box years ago, went to the sort of sports pass that they had, and it was a great value. It was sort of $16 a month, which I think would be about $8 or something like that, £5, £6, something like that. And it was everything. It was about 8 or 9 channels, but then they decided to put it up to $50 a month. So I dropped it. So, it's one of these things I'm only picking and choosing, but there's a value sort of price point that I know a lot of sports fans, you don't want to go past because, you're having to dip into your wallet all over the place. I mean, it's hard being a sports fan wherever you are in the world with the expectations that sometimes with your set-top box, if you do have that situation, you got a fee for that, and then you got to pay a fee on top for sports or even just a mobile pass, people are sort of squeezing your tit all over the place and looking for that extra drop of money. So another player coming into the market in 200 markets into DAZN. Some people will have to make some decisions about where they spend their money, but they've got to have good content to get subscribers on board beyond just, the odd sort of card, the odd fight. Because I wonder, what is the sort of, day to day when there's nothing on during the week? What are they showing us? I mean, I don't know what sort of rights they would have access to in New Zealand that would be immediately available. But yeah, I'm interested to see what the offering would be. We're trying to catch up with the chat here. So plenty of people talking about David Nika, New Zealand boxer. He's at the Olympic qualifiers. Talented, very talented. All Things Awesome Gaming says, Boxing Squared, is Daniel Dubois the perfect retirement fight and passing of the torch of British heavyweights for AJ or Fury? I mean, you would have to imagine that Frank Warren has a grand plan where something like this factors into it. He's trying to build Daniel Dubois into the WBO mandatory spot. And if you think about the timing and the WBO mandatory that eventually gets held, remembering Usyk is the existing one, Daniel Dubois at number 3, you'd have to imagine old Fish Eyes Bricktop would want to have Daniel Dubois ready and waiting to have that sort of fight. But I could see Tyson Fury just turning around and retiring and go, well, I don't want to play into that narrative. So UK Rob Boxing, who did have a very interesting chat with his offsider Matt Hunter on their show about the DAZN stuff. He says, hopefully for many countries, DAZN picks up a PBC cards like they have in Spain. I think that would certainly help. I mean, I think there's a situation often that, depending on your situation with who you subscribe to, in terms of your local broadcaster, it's a bit haphazard about what cards you can actually get. And, I understand, why people are driven to try stream fights because they can't have access to some of them. It's like literally impossible for some people. Danny Tanner says, it was great when Sky used to do a once-off weekend pass for $20. I don't want to subscribe for the whole month. Yeah, I mean, it sort of seems to be, sort of Sky Sports New Zealand for the international listener. It's a case of they were, in the 1990s, just the only game in town. Probably like whatever broadcaster is in your country that sort of had a monopoly on sport, say in the UK, Sky Sports or BT or whoever in America, wherever else you are, the main dominant player for playing sport. It was just a stranglehold, and you were forced to pay your $50 for your monthly, basic thing, and then your $30 on top, all that sort of stuff. But as the sort of digital age has sort of come about, they were sort of left, asleep at the wheel, as it were, and just moved too late to try to have streaming and other bits and pieces, and probably 3 or 4 years too late. So what's happened is their subscriber base is just, falling, plummeting, and at the same time, what they're trying to do to keep revenue up is keep increasing prices, which sort of exacerbates their situation. It's madness. Like, as I was mentioning before, the pass that I had for $16 a month for mobile, which was about 8 channels, including the ESPN channels, and it did have a lot of fights from overseas too. All of a sudden, 16 to 50, and I'm like, why would I want to do that? I would rather just, do those short-term passes or the one-off pay-per-view cost, just because it's more effective, and just because I don't have a lot of spare time necessarily to watch every other sport in the world because, boxing can be all-consuming sometimes, as you're well known. If you're a boxer, most people here will know what I'm talking about in terms of, keeping up as a hardcore boxing fan. It takes a lot of time, effort, and dedication. You sort of fall into it, and you don't even realize you're doing it until you think, oh, well, I was following the NBA closely for years and years and years. Now I've sort of, devolved into a casual fan for that sport or other sports, or you just end up sort of being a casual supporter following the big sports, test matches or whatever. So yeah, boxing is just one of those all-consuming type of sports that once you sort of go down the rabbit hole, it's it's hard to get out sometimes, but I think that's why we love it, because it is one of those sports that there's so many storylines, because there's just so many fighters, divisions, the whole fractured nature of the sport adds another sort of layer of sort of spice to everything. Okay, I'm just catching up to the chat to the main page here. So Lou Buck says, big up Boxing Squid, big up to you too. L-Dog says, sorry that Hrgović has not had the red carpet rolled out for him and gets praise for fighting the mighty Fujimoto. Yeah, Fujimoto, be interesting to see what happens with him if he retires. But of Hrgović, yeah, now going to be fighting Jerry Forrest in April. So, yeah, it's sort of, I wonder, there's got to be some guys that have joined on to Matchroom at this point, and Hrgović must be one of them, Parker to some extent too, that must be wondering that they had high hopes to get pushed further and faster into bigger fights. It just hasn't quite paid off. And for me, Jerry Forrest for Filip Hrgović is a disappointing fight, given, he's 10-0, whatever it is, but he's looking to get into bigger and better fights. And to me, Jerry Forrest is at Eric Molina level, maybe slightly better, but, he's sort of past that at this point. I mean, Jerry Forrest gave Jermaine Franklin a good fight, but, that doesn't necessarily say much about, where Jermaine Franklin's at this point. Hrgović is a cut above, and, yeah, it is what it is. And sort of the same sort of thing with Ajit Kabayel. I know that he's recently signed his co-promotional deal with ESPN and Top Rank and couldn't get his visa issue sorted out, but then to have him put into a fight with Mariusz Wach, I was just kind of like, really? I mean, good for Mariusz Wach getting a payday, but there's all these fights that are getting made at the moment that, as we all seem to be pointing out, what is the point? Everyone's sort of circling each other, not doing a lot. But I guess in between times, and in Oscar Rivas as well, versus Devin Vargas. Also, that's his first fight on his Top Rank deal. But yeah, I was hoping for better than Vargas. But I guess guys like Rivas, Kabayel, out of the ring for a bit, so it's the tune-up. But it kind of, I was having a think today after I did my heavyweight news and brief video, where it's sort of the Rivas one, I did a separate video for that, but Hrgović and Forrest, that was in that video. And I thought, yeah, man, is this 2019 sort of, it's, that felt like it was the year of the tune-up. It just kind of feels like some guys, and I don't know why, with all these silos that have developed and massive amounts of heavyweights in each of them, why can't they be having some in-house fights? Often we know it can be hard to get things working across the different stables, but you should be able to set up some in-house fights in your own stable. Yeah, so I mean, that was one of my issues that I had on my list was Filip Hrgović versus Jerry Forrest. Yeah, not thrilled with that. I mean, for any other 10-0 prospect, I mean, for guys that have less name recognition, less experience and skill than Filip Hrgović, yeah, it's a perfectly fine fight for someone with 10-0. But for Hrgović, who wants to be pushed faster, he must be thinking, why am I in this fight? Why can't they get me a better fight? Kabayel versus Mariusz Wach. I mean, as I mentioned in my video, it's a chance for him to sort of upstage Dillian Whyte a bit. I think I actually had a few people that were very confident that Mariusz Wach, after sort of competing with Dillian Whyte and it being interesting, that Mariusz Wach was going to win. Yeah, they're in for... they're really going to sort of... have to rub their eyes and look at the TV when Kabayel fights him, because he is going to box Mariusz Wach's socks off. And Oscar Rivas probably going to knock out Devin Vargas. He's had 5 knockouts from 6 losses in his career. Oscar Rivas will give him a 6th knockout. Another fighter as well who's left Matchroom, actually, Murat Gassiev, apparently through frustration. There's some sort of promotional issue. There was he was co-promoted by Matchroom, and a couple of others was Warriors Boxing and Ural Boxing. And now he's signed with Patriot Boxing. So I don't know what the state of his contract was. He announced in 2018 in April that he was joining Matchroom, etc., and looked like he'd have a fight with Joey DeWeco, got injured, but maybe it wasn't injury. Maybe some of this was promotional issues. I did see Joey DeWeco actually say he was signed to fight Gassiev 3 times. I thought it was 2, but DeWeco said 3 times. Kept falling over. So I will soon get to some of the upcoming action, but I'll just get back to the chat here, and I want to touch on Manuel Char, Trevor Bryan, Andy Ruiz, and we've kind of covered most of the other things off my list. Obviously, Joshua Pulev and White Povetkin, those fights too, we'll touch on them soon, with them being Joshua Pulev not quite officially announced, but the fighters have said, yeah, it's happening, but we haven't had all the other sort of other things, the press release, press conference, and other bits and pieces. But no doubt in the next week or two, that's going to happen for Joshua Pulev, as it did for White Povetkin, which was announced, and then a press conference held a day or 2 later. And Dillian White's sort of theme for the year is maximum violence. But I'll get back to the chat here. So Hrgovic should be fighting Bacoli, Kuzman, Takam, or even Tepper. Well, there was a lot of talk that it was going to be Hrgovic and Bacoli in April, but yeah, I don't know what happened to that, because you have Billy Nelson out on social media sort of saying, hey, Martin Bacoli is available for Joseph Parker if you want to fight in the middle of the year. So got me thinking that, well, what happened to the fight or potential fight with Filip Hrgovic? And there seemed to be a bit of steam for that, and fans were, really reacting to that, thinking, yeah, that's a good fight. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe money, don't know. So Adam says White did go life and death with a fossil of wok. Yeah, he did. I mean, his conditioning didn't help him in that, played a part clearly, but that doesn't mean that Walker's going to go in there and beat up Ajit Kabiel. I just had a massive laugh at that. And if you're offended by that, if you think Marius Walker's going to beat Ajit Kabiel, I don't know what to tell you. Whatever you have been smoking, send some to me, because obviously it's the good stuff. Rohowa says, whatever happened to Gary Cornish? He retired. He had some sort of issue that came to light, I think in a brain scan or something, and he just retired. He's like, nah, not messing around with this. Siggy says, good point, Eddie needs to focus on the heavies. Well, he's got this massive stable, and some of them must be thinking, why did I sign here? Because, it sort of seems there's a couple at the top that are getting the treatment and being looked after very well, but there's all this up-and-coming talent, the next generation, the guys that are going to be running the division in a few years, or at least some of them, and it feels like they're being neglected to some extent. And I know that there's a lot of opponents out there that seem to be, driving up their price and making it difficult to make fights, but just make some fights within your own stable. Get some good fights together. So Adam says, Cornish retired, full-time adjoiner now. Yep, that's correct. Lubak says, Yoka needs a big breakthrough fight this year. It's interesting. He's meant to be fighting in just over a week's time. He said he's fighting in New York. He's in training camp in bloody bar. March the 14th, he's had these different posts where he's spoken about it, but they haven't announced his top rank deal, and they haven't announced him in a fight. So, yeah, I don't know if they've struggled to get an opponent, but... Siggy says, all them YouTubers, come on, get some heavyweight hitters. Yeah, it's interesting with the whole YouTube thing. I know that it's sort of a split divide about, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, I mean, at least it's exposing a younger audience or a different audience to boxing, and maybe some of them are sort of getting captivated. I mean, it's sort of hard to... I mean, when you think about it, from, what was something that got you into boxing and, sort of got you hooked? Because it can be one of these things that it either is like, snap your fingers and you just, it's in your blood, or it happens gradually over time. And I think with some new audiences, they're going to need to be exposed to it a number of times. So if guys like Logan Paul or KSI or whatever end up having multiple fights that is on, in boxing, over time, that could actually bring in fans. Maybe not necessarily all at once. I think they say in, was it marketing or something, people need to see something, was it half a dozen times before it starts sticking. Could be that the same for some of these new fans. So Cash for Cat says, hello Boxing Squared, hello to you too. Crazy D3 says, White should have agreed to fight Hrgovic and not Povetkin. Well, I guess it's the, you got to look at these things. It's not just straight matchups as we'd often want them and go, that's a better matchup than another, or, one guy's going to, knock someone out, or what. I mean, the whole business side factors into this. Dillian Whyte's in the Dillian Whyte business, and now that he's cleared the whole UCAD situation, it's back to resuming being the sort of second pay-per-view guy at heavyweight for Matchroom after Joshua. They're going to want to be selling so many pay-per-views to, Sky will, along with Matchroom, to generate a certain amount of revenue every year. White is now a proven commodity. He's got the Chisora pay-per-view, Rivas, and Joseph Parker. Alexander Povetkin, it's a mix between who is a guy that's got name recognition, but also we know, we can still sell a decent amount of pay-per-views. Because if you swap out Povetkin for Hrgovic, probably the pay-per-view number goes down because casual fans don't know him. Remembering Alexander Povetkin's had a whole bunch of fights in the UK now. He fought David Price, Anthony Joshua, and I'm sure I'm missing someone else, Hughie Fury. So he's had a few fights. People know him in terms of the casual boxing fan. And at this point, that's a fight White should win because Povetkin is clearly on the decline, but it will be one of these fights that will be competitive, for a decent stretch of it. Well, I imagine it would be. Alex says, what's the deal with Glovegate? Saw George Gross commenting on the other day too. Did cover this off earlier. I'm of the opinion that this is sour grapes. There's been a whole bunch of people on either side of this argument that have made cases either way. I've moved on from that. I mean, there's got to be, I'm seeing people now saying that Tyson Fury spiked Deontay Wilder's water. So, some of these things just end up going to the absurd. L-Dog says, I value power punches, volume. It was a pick 'em fight. It depends on how you like to score fights. Not sure what that one's about. Scott70 says, I'll send you some of mine if he doesn't. Cabial gets the easy win there, Boxing Squared. Yeah, I agree. I couldn't believe when there was the sort of talk for Mariusz Wach beating Ajit Cabial because of the strength of the performance against White. Yeah, Mariusz Wach has done very well out of fighting Dillian Whyte because that made him look better than he really is at this point. Jason says DAZN should do a heavyweight tournament. They have enough fighters. Yeah, but you could argue the same for all of these promotional stables. Top Rank, with everyone that they've recently signed. Ajit Cabial, Tony Yoka's coming into the fold. Oscar Rivas, Jarrell Miller. They've also got Tyson Fury, Kubrat Pulev, Carlos Takam, Bryant Jennings. There's a tournament right there, and you don't need to have Fury or Pulev in it. There could be another sort of between those lower guys, and lower in terms of, they're not right there for a title shot right now. They could be having some sort of, semi-final, or quarter-final semi, and, it could be something you could do. And in terms of PBC, they've got a stack of heavyweights as well as Matchroom. I did actually a post on Patreon towards the end of last year saying it is time for a tournament, and I went through some of these. These guys could do a tournament in either or any of these stables because they have these heavies that they could do something with. And given some feel like they're at a loose end, why not? Why not have something like that? So, Ro Hoa says, liking a video pushes it up in the YouTube search and gets it recommended. Yeah, it's one of those things. Yeah, liking a video certainly does help. So we've got 100 people in the chat right now. So if you can, smash that like button if you do like the live stream so far. Much appreciated. And it's not just the likes as well. It's a whole number of factors based on who you... the sort of content you like, but also for the actual video itself. If the video is doing well in terms of watch time, that helps it as well, because YouTube wants people watching YouTube for longer and longer, because ultimately if you stayed on there for an hour and you're watching multiple videos, in all likelihood you're also watching multiple ads, and YouTube is basically advertising. That's why they want you to come there. It's not necessarily because of the content. They want the content to be good because then they get more ads played, which is good for everyone involved. So yeah, if you can smash the like button, that would be much appreciated. So I'll just go back to my list, a couple of other things I wanted to cover off, and then I'll get back to the chat here. Yeah, so Joshua and Pulev coming out on social media. Joshua with the June 20 in the calendar emoji. Kubrat Pulev, a bit more detail, but yeah, it's on. It may not necessarily be the sort of fight that everyone wants to see, but, you know, mandatory challenges, it is what it is. Sort of can't get around them to some extent, and that's what sort of makes me wonder about what's happening with Usyk, and you know, if he is taking millions in step aside, I mean, good for him. But Kubrat Pulev was never going to step aside, and at 38 years old, and I think he'll be about 39 at the time of the fight. I could be wrong on that, but he wants his shot sooner than later. You know, the longer he leaves it, you know, it's going to be worse for him. I mean, he's a shot in the fight, but Anthony Joshua, you know, a favourite for good reason. But I am going to do a video, and I haven't had time. Literally the last 2 weeks, it's been so crazy with the amount of news that's been going on. It's just been incredible. But I do think that people are sort of overlooking Pulev to some extent, thinking Joshua will just walk through him. Because if Joshua wants to be aggressive, you know, that's going to introduce some risk. But also, you got to remember, Kubrat Pulev has been planning this fight for 3 years. Don't want to say too much more, otherwise I'll sort of, you know, take out all the points of my upcoming video. But yeah, White Povetkin also announced. So we're going to have a whole bunch of pay-per-views coming up. And when you consider that Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois, another pay-per-view, it'll be about 4 pay-per-views in the space of 5 weeks, something like that. I'll just take a sip of water, just bear with me. I'll get back to the chat, and then I want to talk about some of these fights this weekend. I have heard a little bit of criticism of some of these different matchups. Adam Kovnatsky versus Robert Helenius, F.A. Jagba, Razvan Kajanu, Frank Sanchez versus Joey DeWeco. Yeah, they're not some of the strongest matchups, but I am looking forward to the fights in particular. One, because they're heavyweight fights, but there's some good talking points coming out of this for all of these different fights. And we do have the Dempsey McKean versus Johnny Rice fight as well that I want to touch on. As I was saying earlier, I feel that's the best video that I've made in the past week or two. Probably got the least views, but that's going to be an interesting matchup. And in the video, I actually managed to get both Johnny Rice and Dempsey McKean sending me a video clip, them talking about the upcoming fight between themselves. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one, because obviously not a lot of big fights happen down in the Southern Hemisphere, especially New Zealand, Australia. There's the odd big fight. It sort of seems to be at the moment. You've got guys like in Australia, Tim Tszyu or Jeff Horn. There's the odd big card, or often other, you know, when there is a big card, sometimes it'll be a rugby league player who's having a fight, and, you know, sort of seems to be that star power from another code bringing it to boxing. Which is similar in a way, I guess, if you sort of say YouTubers coming to boxing, it's sort of the same thing, because a lot of these guys would get sparked, you know, if they were facing decent heavyweights. So like Paul Gallen, Barry Hall, I do think that, you know, if they would have stepped to any real level, you know, it's lights out. But they make big paydays for coming in for these sorts of fights. But I digress. You know, Dempsey McKean is sort of that, after, you know, Lucas Brown has been the face of Australian heavyweight boxing for what, 5 years maybe, something like that. He sort of took over from Alex Leopai. Dempsey McKean sort of seems to be that next guy, you know, after Lucas Brown. And then there's going to be a pipeline of others like Justice Hooney, who's going to be going to the Olympics. He looks like a real talent and a guy to watch out for. But Dempsey McKean versus Johnny Rice, for me, I'm really, really looking forward to this fight. And I know some people will go, really? I mean, it seems to be a bit of a lower level fight, but it's, you know, an unbeaten guy in McKean, 17-0, and I don't know what his level is at the moment. You know, I have a guess of where he could go and his ceiling, but, you know, the more I see of him, the more you know. It's like any fighter. And in Jonathan Rice, who's had good fights with Tony Yoka, he took Arslanbek Makhmadov, the longest in his professional career, 7 rounds. This was last year. You know, he's a guy with some skills and can move well, and it could be one of these sort of fights where it's very evenly matched. And Rice, you know, who's been brought in as the opponent, could actually be on the same sort of level with McKean and make it very tough for him. And I have seen a number of people who are picking Rice to win. There's an IBF International strap on the line. There's also a WBO, I think it's Asia Pacific as well. So there's a couple of decent regional straps that are going to push the winner of this higher up or in rankings or into a ranking in the IBF case. So McKean, Rice, yeah, that's on Epic Centre TV. That's happening on the Gold Coast. So I think that's, by the time that main event happens, that'll be like about 1 a.m. New Zealand time Sunday morning, which will be somewhere around lunchtime in the UK and earlier in the morning in the US. It'll be one of the rare times, because most boxing that I watch here in New Zealand is in the afternoon or morning on a Sunday. So anything happening in the UK on a Saturday night or the US on a Saturday night is UK is New Zealand time, is the Sunday morning, US is the afternoon time. And then as well this weekend, we've got Adam Kovnarski, Robert Helenius, F.A. Ajagba, Razvan Kajanu, Frank Sanchez, Foray vs. Joey DeWeco, Robert Alfonso and Carlos Negron, all on the same card. They're calling it the Night of Heavyweights. I'll talk about that in a sec, but I'll just give it back to the comment section just very quickly. So Crazy D3, thank you for the super chat. He says, should Breedis vs. Dorticus winner move up to heavyweight? I guess it's the, well, technically, Breedis has before. I mean, remembering he sparked Manuel Char, 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was. But, yeah, Dorticus certainly has the power to compete at heavyweight. But, yeah, some of the guys at the moment, you've got Usyk coming up, you've got Gassiev coming up, and because they've sort of failed to fire yet, you know, I wonder if some of these other guys, you know, are going to wait till after this tournament, sort of see how some of these guys are doing, because all these injuries that are being reported for Gassiev and Usyk is that, you know, they're just having trouble adjusting. That naturally they are cruiserweights, that, you know, perhaps that is their, you know, their natural weight, that there's strain on their body from the training, you know, to get up to maintain around 220 or something like that, because some of these guys might be, you know, naturally walking around to sort of 10, 220, something like that, but for heavyweight, they're probably looking to put a little bit more muscle on and just, you know, do things a little bit different. There's a bit different strain on their body. So, yeah, I mean, Breedis and Dorticus, I mean, maybe they'll dabble. I mean, guys like Marco Hook, he's sort of up and down. I don't know. Getting back to the chat. L-Dog says, check out Justice Hooney. Yep, just mentioned him. He is going to be one of these guys that is the next, in the next wave. You know, you sort of think of the guys that have come through from the last Olympics: Tony Yoka, Joe Joyce, Filip Hrgovic, F.A. Ajagba, and Bakadir Jalilov. He was an Olympian. You also had Ali Aaron Demirezian, Ivan Daichko. He actually was at a couple of Olympics, got bronze at both London and also Rio. You know, there's all these guys coming through. Some of them are really making a name for themselves now, and Justice Hooney is going to be part of that next wave. And obviously Bakadir Jalilov dropping back down to the amateurs, qualifying for the Olympics, all that sort of stuff. I think he's only going to get better with time as well. He was pretty green when he went to Rio, and 4 more years. I mean, he's certainly, him, Justice Hooney, depends on the draw too. You know, they are probably likely to medal both of those guys at Tokyo, if Tokyo goes ahead, that is. MAW Moore says, let's go Dempsey McKean. Looking forward to that fight, as I said. Unga says, George Michael, why has he not won every other division and his power increases as he moves up? Okay, I'm not sure. Pacquiao. Yeah, I did see that he's potentially going to be fighting Mikey Garcia next, or maybe even Errol Spence. I mean, if there was any time to get Errol Spence after that car crash, surely now would be it. I mean, there's obviously a question mark about, is he going to be the same? I mean, I'm certainly interested in to sort of see that. I mean, he's been in some great fights, but what did that crash do to him? I mean, or is he fine? I mean, he looks fine, but you never really know. So George Michael says, Johnny Rice is elite, 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 elite. Johnny Rice is one of the most great right hands, like Klitschko, straight up, beautiful shot. Rice technically superb. Okay, that certainly is talking Johnny Rice up there. L-Dog says, Victor Vickhurst turned pro at Boxing Squared. Yeah, I think I said, saw someone didn't post in one of the Facebook groups, doesn't he have a fight coming up in April or May? Unga says, George Michael, please, we've seen Johnny Rice. If that's your idea of elite, time to find a new sport. George says, no one realizes, but Johnny Rice, right hand, is a thing of beauty. He had Yoka looking like a giraffe. He did give Yoka a very good fight. St. Beelzebub says, sound. I'm not sure what that's referring to. I'll just try to catch up here on the chat. I'm pretty sure that the sound is playing. Haven't had any other complaints. Brian says, hi, Kevin. Where do you live in God's Zone? Kevin. That's not my name. And what's your opinion of Parker versus Farr? Really can't see Farr beating Parker. Yeah, at this point, Joseph Parker would be a heavy favourite over Farr. I mean, I don't think it's time for that fight. I mean, if they're just trying to manufacture this for, I mean, as I talked about earlier, potential matchroom card that they may look to sort of put here in New Zealand, this whole DAZN global thing, yada, 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 trying to take boxing to the world, etc. If they try to sort of push, this into that and make it possible, they're going to have to pay Farr the sort of money he wants. But two, at this point, I don't think there's a massive amount in New Zealand, a massive amount of demand, I should say, for that fight. One, as I mentioned earlier, Joseph Parker, sort of his popularity has sort of dipped off after the losses. Some casuals have sort of walked away. I mean, it always happens, but he's had 18 pretty quiet months with 3 tune-ups. And Junior Farr is not a household name in New Zealand yet. He needs to do more in the heavyweight division. So I kind of think that they're looking at this in a certain way, but I'm not sure it would be nearly as successful as they're thinking. L-Dog says, the wind could blow a little and Yoka would be wobbled. That man has amazing skills, but a poor chin. Eventually, he could be found out in the division, but he's looked good so far. Great skills, as you say. I pray that's an explosive fight, Helenius versus Kovnatsky. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a moment. George Michael says Johnny Rice can't stop talking about money, so they should take his pay. This fight punishment for ruining our feeds. Yep, if you don't follow Johnny Rice on Twitter, like literally money is in every sort of second or third tweet. Sometimes you can have half a dozen tweets in a row where he's saying something about money. I need to get the money. I need to, I love having money, and just really, interesting. I'll say that tweets about money. L-Dog says, I want to see Aslanbek Makhmadov versus Deontay Wilder. Well, they were offering him $20 million, but I can't see Wilder taking that fight. So Anthony says, Dubois is the only up-and-comer I rate with any chance dependent on his chin. Yeah, that's why I'm looking forward to this Joyce fight so much, because Dubois is going to get chin-checked. If he does take some good shots and comes through it, and ends up beating Joyce, his stock is only just going to go through the ceiling. So Cash for Cat says Huey Fury at Manchester Arena, definitely won't be watching that. So yeah, versus Pavel Sauer. I'm interested in the result of that and how that plays out, because not so much because, afterwards they're going to say Huey's ready for a rematch, Huey's back to world level, all the issues are sorted. It's more so just the sort of, Pavel Sauer has fought a number of guys like Hrgovic, and he got sparked early, and then he fought Jermaine Franklin, and Franklin was taking the distance. He did drop him a couple of times. I'm sort of trying to get a gauge on power, not necessarily triangle theories, but, Huey Fury's right hand, I'm sort of a bit unclear about how powerful he hits. So given Sauer's fought some, guys that I can get a read on, who sort of, a bit of, Jermaine Franklin's lacking a bit of power. Hrgovic has got above average power. So I'll be interested to see if he can stop Sauer, and because if he does, it's going to be that slinging right hand that does it. So White vs. Povetkin ticket sales soon, on sale soon. Will it sell straight out, or will it be hard to get a ticket? I imagine it won't sell out. The fight with Oscar Rivas, that ended up having a late push, and I think they ended up selling, was it 17 or 18,000 tickets? But, it was sort of sitting around 14 or 15 for a while. It wasn't like a massive surge towards sellout. It sort of did. And I think Povetkin, I think this is going to have more interest than a Rivas fight, but it might take some time before it does sell out. So Danny Tanner says, I thought Usyk had similar dimensions to maybe a Joseph Parker, just less chunky. Yeah, there's a number of guys that are all around sort of 6'3"-ish that, people consider, guys, some of the cruiserweights, they talk about them, these guys are small, but, when you consider Alexander Usyk's got the height and the reach on Derek Chisora, it sort of puts some of these things in perspective too. So Raz Bashi says Parker needs bigger fights than Farr. I agree. But when he talked about, in the post-fight, Joseph Parker, this is after sparking Shawndale Winters in Texas, about sort of a fight in the middle of the year and then a big bang at the end of the year, it did get me thinking, is this just going to be an intermediary step next, not the sort of fight we would like? And yeah, I think that sort of a Farr fight sort of falls into that category. Yeah, if Junior Farr had a couple of bigger wins on his resume, I think there'd be a lot more interest for that sort of fight. I think though, if they do end up having it, the promotion probably goes okay, but it's probably not going to go gangbusters like Joseph Parker events used to in New Zealand in the past. And sort of the way I look at it as well with that is, I sort of think back to David Tua in the sort of 90s, because he was, a massive household name in New Zealand. It started off with the Olympics, and then, he had a really, really good career. But then he got to, he did have, obviously a loss along the way, but he was still a big star, and then obviously fought for a title. And then after that, sort of in the 2000s, it just kind of feels like some of the profile dipped off, and he didn't get another title shot. And some of the fights up until the Cameron fight, which was 2009, it was like almost like I don't want to say a lost period, but it feels like there was never the same interest in him. And I sort of think Parker is in a little bit of that, and it's sort of come off the peak, and maybe he won't ever get back to it. I mean, it's hard to say, but I think if he does do events in New Zealand now, you can't do the old Duco special, which was, find someone who was an overmatched opponent and had either a clean record or one or two losses, and then talk up, what a tough fight this and what a huge test this is going to be. Joseph Parker's closing in on a title. He needs to beat this guy and prove, da-da-da-da-da. People sort of tired of that and sort of woke up to it. And then the bigger fights eventually happened. So I think even some of the casual fans that were following Parker before the title sort of woken up to some of the tactics and expect the better fights now. And so they should. I think we do. Certainly as boxing fans, we want to see the best fighting the best more often than not. But, lately it's been not for a lot of fighters in the heavyweight division. Okay, I'm going to catch up on the chat here. I was falling horrifically behind. So we've got 85 in the chat here. So thank you for joining the Boxing Squared live stream wherever you are in the world, morning, noon, or night. Thank you very much. Smash that like button if you can. That would be much appreciated. So Lubak says, I missed that in the amateurs, but Demirjian is more suited to. Okay, I missed out on that conversation there. UK Rob says, Taylor Serrano now official, really helps push the white tickets. Place was rammed for Taylor's last fight on the crawler card. Yeah, I mean, they need to be pushing and having good fights on the undercard, some names to help sell tickets, because on the strength of the main event, it may not sell out just on that alone. So having Taylor Serrano and some other fights on there, that's going to certainly help. Anthony Willis says, L-Dog Dubois will use his size to move in on those guys and land those grenades he has with both hands. Heavy Metal Mikey, I'm 15 years away to be the 40-year-old version. I will win. Okay, I walked in on a conversation, not sure what that is about. So Unga says, Ronald Finkley, I probably lost more than you, but those gloves claims are delusional, coming from people with no basic understanding of boxing. I'll just try to catch up on the chat here. Glovegate doesn't sound like it's going to go away anytime soon. There's as many videos debunking the claims as there are, about the whole thing in general. Lubak says Demirjian is more suited to the pro game. We certainly gave FA Jagba a fight, and I think on the strength of that fight there, it's sort of got people questioning, FA Jagba, his talent level, but I think it kind of didn't give Demirjian the sort of credit he deserves. I mean, people forget he was unbeaten going into that fight. He was, an Olympian himself, a talented amateur. I'll just quickly have a look at these last few comments and then get to this weekend's card with Adam Kovnatsky headlining in New York. Chat's moving pretty quickly. It's hard to keep up. So Ayup says, morning, mate. Morning to you too. Raz says, like and share. Yes, please. Ayabuchi's last hurrah. He went to prison after that, didn't he? Yeah, he certainly. I'd actually read a post. It was actually earlier today that talked about that. Before the tour fight, he had a few issues, but after the tour fight, he kind of, it went to his head a little bit, and he was always a guy that was no stranger to sort of running up to the side of the law for whatever different things, speeding in cars, or just, the post I read said, he'd get a haircut and then just walk out without paying. But yeah, I mean, that was, Ayabuchi he was a great talent, and that was a great fight with Tua. So Mr. Mahazista says, why doesn't Joseph Parker as a fight in Australia? His fan base spreads past New Zealand. It's got to be the right opponent, I think, if it was going to be Australia. And if you were to make a fight there, it makes sense for it to be an Australian. And is there anyone right now at the level, sort of near the level, that you could put a fight on and it not be called a mismatch? I mean, at this point, Lucas Brown is as rinsed as a dishcloth. Guy like Dempsey McKean, even if he beats Jonathan Rice this weekend, I mean, people would still sort of say, that's maybe more Junior Farr, Dempsey McKean. They should be fighting each other as opposed to McKean and Parker. So, yeah, I mean, the talent sort of pool in terms of the heavyweights, once you get past a couple of names in Australia and New Zealand, dips off pretty quickly. And, yeah, not a huge amount of, fighters coming through either to sort of replenish stocks, say from 20, 30, 40 years ago, many more fighters than there are today. I mean, it's just a reality. It's a niche sport in, a lot of countries, including New Zealand, Australia. So Speak Your Mind Sports TV says, you're doing great, brother. We can't ever keep up with the chat. Yeah, it goes so quickly. And, trying to pick my way through different conversations that are happening at the same time as comments that have been asked. So Uncle Krim says that he loves my accent. I actually get asked quite a bit if I'm from Australia, and I get Canada occasionally, but a lot of the times on the channel, people don't realise that I'm from New Zealand, and especially I get a lot of comment from American viewers who think that I'm from the UK and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I guess accents aren't some people's strong suit. And, I'm not criticising anyone for that. So Right Hook Boxing is off. All the best, Good Stream Boxing Squared. Thank you for joining us, Right Hook Boxing. His channel, very good. If you haven't followed him, give him a follow and check him out. Mr. Mahazista says, Joseph Parker versus Brown, anyone interested in a New Zealand Trans-Tasman fight? I mean, Lucas Brown is getting touched up by the likes of Dave Allen, obviously brutalised by Dillian White, dropped by Kamil Sokolowski. I mean, the time for that was 2017, and they almost got it done. Brown signed his end of the deal, but Parker chased the Joshua fight and got it. Signed the deal, fought him in 2018. So Danny says Tua is still New Zealand's favourite heavyweight. He had his flaws, but such a fun, explosive fighter. Yeah, Yeah, Tua still now is a big name, and obviously he's sort of one of the crowning achievements of his career towards the back end was that demolition of Shane Cameron, which is still the record holder for pay-per-view, somewhere around 85,000 in New Zealand, which at the time I think there was about 4.2 million people in the country. So, the percentage-wise, it was a decent amount compared to the actual number of people that could buy it, and also. I think, Joseph Parker and Andy Ruiz's fight, that didn't break the record, but it apparently got close. But numbers here never released. So Big Chili says, what if Wilder wins the third fight? Well, then he regains the title. Be interesting, though, would we get a fourth fight? I'm not really interested in that, a fourth fight. Maybe Fury, I don't know. I mean, hopefully we don't hear there's another two-way rematch clause, because if Wilder does beat Fury, I would like to just see the division move on. L-Dog says, hell no, Lucas Brown is shot to pieces and was KO'd by Dave Allen. Yeah, exactly my sentiments there. Yeah, it's sort of past the point. I mean, Brown is now being fed to up-and-coming heavyweights. Abdi Davtayev fighting Lucas Brown on the 28th in Vegas. Okay, just catching up here. So Brian says, sad news about Jimmy Thunder passing. Yeah, he was a good fighter. And one of these, I mean, I was sort of alluding to before, the talent pool. It's always been somewhat relatively thin in terms of New Zealand and the guys that end up making it to world level. But Thunder was one of these exciting guys that, he was a household name in New Zealand in the 1990s as well. So Cinnamon Savage says, what do you think about Dimitri Bivol? I like his skill. He's a very technically sound fighter, but dude puts me to sleep. Honestly, some of his fights are so boring. And I know that, he's doing what he has to do to keep his title, but his stock just doesn't go anyone. L-Dog says... Okay, there's something with Ronald Finkley, not sure what happened there. Rahowa, okay, also talking to Ronald. Lubak says, let's hope Fury sends Wilder into retirement, as fourth fight is too much. Benjo says, brave man Corey Sanders died tragically defending his daughter. Alex says, just seen some people now posting reverse glovegate images of Wilder's gloves bending in the same way. This thing is like, going down the rabbit hole. It's just never going to end. So Ronald says he knows that I'm from New Zealand. Salute. Yeah, a lot of people don't, though. Yeah, it's quite interesting. People will make assumptions about why I'm making a comment thinking I'm from the UK. Brian says, I think you would give Keith Quinn a run for his commentary skills. Keith Quinn is a legend of, rugby commentary, not really my sort of thing. I just, like a lot of you, just a massive boxing fan. And, this channel, it's March now. So, yeah, 2 years, 9 months-ish, 8 months, something like that. Just sort of grown over time. And I think everyone who's here, morning, noon or night, wherever you are in the world, thanks for coming, supporting the channel on an ongoing basis. Up over 26,000 subscribers now. And I know that, heavyweight is not everyone's cup of tea, or they come for certain fighters. And, some people sometimes ask me, why do you cover, I get quite often, people will ask, why did you cover this fight? Why are you doing a video on this? It's beneath you. And some of it will be on those lower tier fighters, but I don't want to keep doing videos about the same 5 fighters all the time, because to me that's boring. So seeing some of these guys coming up in the division, like a Dempsey McKean, and he's having a step up fight versus Jonathan Rice, to me that I'm really interested, and I've already bought the pay-per-view for that. That was 21 Australian dollars or whatever it was. So I will be doing a post-fight on that at like 2 o'clock in the morning or so, whenever it is on Sunday morning. But yeah, I mean, I know it's not for everyone. And as I was saying earlier, I think that might be the best video that I did in the past couple of weeks, managing to get both fighters. And yeah. But I'll just continue on in the chat. I should get to, I said we were going to talk about Adam Kovnarski and Robert Helenius and the undercard as well. I'll get to that now. So apologies if I've missed a comment. The chat's just going very quickly. I'll cut to the bottom of the chat. If you want to ask me the question, do so after I've sort of got off my little ramble here. So Kovnarski versus Helenius. I'm interested in this fight because Adam Kovnarski is a very fun, he's a come-forward fighter, punches and bunches, but he's very hittable, and, we saw that in the Charles Martin fight. But some of this fight, to me, Kovnarski is a very heavy favourite of Robert Helenius on the downslide, but he's got a good right hand. He's the much bigger guy here, the height and the reach. The question is, how long can he fend Adam Kovnarski off for? Because if he can manage to do that and catch him on the way in, could be an interesting fight. I mean, Charles Martin was rocking Kovnarski towards the end of their fight, but that was when he was tired. And conditioning with Kovnarski always becomes an issue the deeper into a fight it goes. But Helenius, he is, certainly an underdog, and he's sort of potential that's never been realized. Big raps on him way back when. It's never really sort of panned out for him. Hand injuries, all sorts, underperformance. It's just sort of frozen in the spotlight. And I was surprised he got this fight with Kovnarski, but some of it clearly is he's a beatable opponent. Yeah, he's a name of sorts in the heavyweight division, been around forever and a day now, best part of a decade. But it's really interesting how they managed to get him ranked at number 6 in January, and this fight all of a sudden becomes announced. He, obviously got sparked by Gerald Washington in the middle of last year brutally, and that was a really interesting and fun fight, sort of seesaw battle. But I didn't think we would see Helenius at any real level again. So this is like a second chance, or maybe it's about a 5th chance in his career. Can he actually grasp it with both hands? And I know most people will say no, but something, because he does carry power, Kovnarski doesn't move his head almost at all. If he can catch him on the way in, it could be interesting. But I'm not picking Helenius, but there's just those things that make me think, there's an outside chance that with, his height and his reach and his power, that he's in the fight to some extent. But Kovnarski, if he manages to get to the inside and starts, beating Helenius to the body and catching him with hooks and stuff, will that pressure fold him as it did Gerald Washington? Could this fight be over in a couple of rounds? And if it is, no matter the result, Adam Kovnarski winning, I know a lot of people will say, well, so what? Helenius on the downslide, back end of his career. Is this a fight we should have been seeing? And obviously at the moment, Kovnarski, it's an interesting situation because at one point he looked close to a fight with Deontay Wilder. He was certainly on the treadmill for a title fight. And then towards, last year it just sort of evaporated. And he sort of said, well, I'm going to stay ready. And now he's in this position where he's a headliner, and it's the second time he's going to be headlining. He is sort of his own little business right now. So while he doesn't have the title shot, you can sort of go like Dillian Whyte to some extent, how Whyte's in his own pay-per-view business in the UK. Is Adam Kovnarski really too fast? Because he's getting served up guys like Areola, headlined, that was at the Barclays, now he's headlining again against Robert Helenius. It's pretty careful matchmaking, guys that he should beat, but, decent, he had a good, decent fight with Chris Areola, and if this ends up being either a blowout or even competitive, it's a win-win for him because, he's going to have a whole stack of fans in the Barclays Centre. So it's kind of like he's his own emerging little business. So if he fights again this year, because he said he wants to have obviously a title shot, etc., but he's got to do what he has to do in the meantime. And a step up or a next, he sort of said it's up to his team to set the fights, yada, yada, yada. So he didn't commit to sort of saying, I'm going to fight a top 10 guy, I'm going to fight a top 15 guy, because at the moment, he hasn't. And for me, I find it hard to sort of know where his ceiling is, because for all intents and purposes, he's pretty basic, but just effective at what he does. Obviously, a very good win against Gerald Washington a year ago. Heading into that, questions about what would happen in that fight, but he, answered them, blew him out in a couple of rounds. He beat Charles Martin, but that was a really tough fight in 2018. Charles Martin really came on strong at the back end of the fight as Kovnatski faded badly. And if that had been a 12-rounder instead of a 10-rounder, Martin probably would have won it. But as it is, it sort of seems like he's almost been going backwards. You have Martin, then Washington, then Areola, and then Helenius, where it should maybe have been the other way around, where he's sort of working his way up. So I do hope that there is some better, I guess they would say it's good matchmaking, because they're, basically packing out a venue and on the strength of Kovnatski's name fighting a Robert Helenius. So that's good business. But for fans, I think we would want to see, where is he really at? Because I'm not sure we truly know, because he hasn't fought anyone that is truly elite, world class or a top 15. I mean, I would love to see him fighting, say, a Luis Ortiz. That would be a great fight. That would tell us more about Adam Kovnatski, than anything we've seen so far. But there has been, and this sort of brings me to my next topic. I'm just going to segue just for a bit and then go back to the other fights. But Andy Ruiz is sort of a few interesting statements. I think last week's live stream, he said he needed a tune-up before he'd consider a Luis Ortiz fight. But then it emerges a few days later. He says, Andy Ruiz, this is he either wants Areola or Kovnatski. Well, that was what was coming out in the reporting. So if there was Kovnatski versus Andy Ruiz, now that really is a great fight, and that would truly tell us where Adam Kovnatski is. But at the same time, it's putting it all on the line for Kovnatski. So does it get made? Because clearly they're trying to keep him unbeaten and ready for a title shot wherever he can get one. Remembering he is ranked highly across all 4 sanctioning bodies. What was it? Number 6 in the WBC, number 4 in the WBA, and Helenius versus Kovnatski is an eliminator, if you can believe that. And then number 3 in the WBO, and number 3 in the IBF. Anyway, he's ranked across all 4 within the top 6. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with Andy Ruiz too, because he's sort of all over the place with his different statements and keeps hinting big announcement coming soon. And he's sort of an announcement announcing that there's an announcement coming. So hopefully it's at least a decent fight. And I probably think it'll end up being Chris Areola, a fight that because if they're ever going to have that one, they've got to do it now, because otherwise they lose the opportunity. Areola is pretty faded and jaded at this point. What is he, 38, 39 years old? Talked about that fight forever and a day. If they're going to do it, they've got to do it next. Otherwise, it's probably not going to happen. And given there has been interest over the years, especially from Mexican fans, for that fight to happen, I could see them making it. And in terms of the risk, it's probably less than Kovnatski. But getting back to the Kovnatski card, and then I'll get to the comment section. Co-main event, Efe Ajagba, Razvan Kajanu. And you may have noted in my preview video this week, on history of Razvan Kajanu and his losses, he's been sparked out 3 times in the second round, and apart from that, it seems to go the distance. So it's kind of one of those 2 results that I'm almost expecting, and I would be leaning towards an earlier stoppage than anything. But some of it will depend on what Razvan Kajanu turns up, and I'm not saying he's got a chance in this fight, because I don't believe that, but it's more when he's shown sort of a penchant to want to fight and throw punches, he ends up getting knocked out. Daniel Dubois, in that fight, he threw probably more punches in the 2 rounds before he got knocked out than he did either against Nathan Gorman or Joseph Parker, and those fights went the distance. So he really sort of goes back and forth on how he wants to sort of fight. But if he reverts to sparring partner mode, it'll be interesting to see what Efe Ajagba can do to sort of break him down, because it's probably going to go some rounds if he goes into sparring partner mode. And I've been talking about Efe Ajagba has been working on head movement, he's been working on his sort of footwork, but also just trying to string together some combinations, because sometimes it's been the 1-2, 1-2. So working on sort of head movement and then throwing hooks, and through some statements that he's made this week and also to PBC on their website, that he's through working on the head movement, he's seeing more angles and that openings that he can sort of work through the head movement. So, I mean, if he can implement some of that, and even if it does go rounds, and there is the potential if Kajanu goes into sparring partner mode, it could be a really boring fight for however long it goes. But if he can actually sort of, do some things that he says he's been working on, I think that'll be pleasing to see for heavyweight fans, because it sort of seems that some of the buzz for Jagba's just sort of come off where it was, because obviously the dropped by Kaladze in that fight, a fight he was dominating pretty much throughout, but also he went the distance with Ali Erendemiresian. And I thought for him at that point, it was right fight at the right time, and he sort of got the test that he wanted, although he was getting hit a lot. So defensively, there's some holes, the head movement, it's an issue, but I'm still high on F.A. Jagba and what he can do. So I'll just get to the chat before getting back to the last couple of fights there. So we've been going for, what is it here? So 1 hour and 38. So we'll try go for another 20 minutes and wrap it up. It's 10 past 11 here, Friday night. 78 in the chat. Thank you for joining one and all, wherever you are in the world. So we've got a super chat here from Crazy D3. Thank you very much for that. He said Adam Kovnarski has a similar style to Jarrell Miller alarm bells. I think a key difference between the two is we've seen Adam Kovnarski, although he's a come-forward pressure fighter, definitely fades. He doesn't have that Energizer Bunny keep going and going and going and going like Jarrell Miller has demonstrated for a guy that is 300 plus pounds. What was he? 315 and 317 for Bogdan Dinu and Thomas Adamek. Crazy, crazy weight. And remembering 5 or 6 years ago, he was like 245. Kovnarski, if he was that weight, he probably would look like Butterbean and, wouldn't be able to do much. But his weight has definitely, in terms of his performances, I think he was about 242 for the Spilka fight. I thought he looked pretty good in there, but obviously he sparked him out in 4 rounds, so some of the stamina didn't come into play. But against Martin, where he was a bit heavier, I want to say he was 262 or something around there, it caught up with him in the second half of the fight. And, I've had some Kovnarski fans previously say he doesn't have a stamina issue, but I think some of it is connected to the weight too, because, obviously he's not the body beautiful and he's coming heavy for a couple of fights. Actually, I'm just interested to see what he was for that Charles Martin fight. Just a sec. Let's bring it up. So Charles Martin, 263, which I think was the second heaviest weight of his career from memory. But yeah, that caught up with him. It really did. And he was 5 pounds lighter for the Washington fight, but that didn't end up being a factor because he sparked him in a couple of rounds. And he was 266 for Areola. And that might have actually been, I think that was his career heavy, that might have been a part in that fight that he couldn't get him out of there. And Areola threw a record 1,125 punches in that fight. I'm just looking at it now. If he had been lighter and had been sort of 240 for the Spilka fight, somewhere around there, or at least around 250, I think it would have been much better for him. I think 260 for Adam Kovnarski at 6'3", or 266 for the Areola fight. It's just too much. It's not Tyson Fury 6'9", where 270 sits a bit better on his frame. Carrying the extra rubble is just going to contribute to stamina issues if the fight goes deep. Maybe Helenius is hoping for that. But certainly caught up with him in that fight with Charles Martin. So I'll just get back to the chat. So Big Chili says, heavyweight division starting to look pretty stacked. Exciting times ahead. Yeah, it sort of teases us, though, because we get some decent fights and then we get a whole lot of nothing in between. A lot of fights that we just would rather not have been made. And especially when they've got, these guys are sort of saying, no one will fight me. And some of these guys are in the same stable. So Ayup says, announcing that his announcement is about to be announced. Yep, that's kind of summing up Andy Ruiz right now. But good to see him back in the gym. So Unga says, Danny Rowe just schooled by the #1 Kazakh current world champ at Olympic qualifiers just now. Yeah, those Kazakh fighters, they are, with the time, effort, and money that they sort of put in the last 15 or 20 years to build their program, that really is bearing fruit right now. Some of those sort of East countries like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, really good amateur programs, and we're starting to see some of these names filter through into the pros now. Scott70 says a Jagba might want to take the rounds here. Well, if Kajanu goes into sparring partner mode, he might be forced to take a few rounds. But if he wants to show us that, he is, moving his head, that his footwork is a little bit slicker, that he's working some other angles and stringing some combinations together, he'll have the opportunity to do so. But if Kajanu starts to come out brawling, as he tried to do in the Dubois fight, a Jagba's probably going to find the opening. But it wouldn't surprise me if Razvan Kajanu fancies his chances somewhat against F.A. Jagba based on the strength of that Kaladze knockdown. And Kajanu himself is actually a decent boxer, but his problem is he doesn't throw any punches. I've seen him in a lot of fights where he'll string together this really slick combination, and he'll do that a couple of times around, and you're just like, why can't you do that all the time? Because if you did, you'd have a better shot of winning some of these rounds and you'd be more competitive in the fight. But it's sort of like he, shells up and then all of a sudden explodes for, 3 seconds, and then the defenses go back up. But not in that fight against Daniel Dubois, which, ended in him falling on his own leg, no less. Looking forward to Usyk versus Chisora. I think that's going to be a more competitive fight than what fans are making it out to be. Or from my read of it, I'm seeing a lot of fans thinking that Derek Chisora is going to, just absolutely bully and butcher Alexander Usyk. That there's a lot of support behind Chisora for that fight. I think that Usyk is going to, use his movement. And similar to other fighters who've fought Derek Chisora, and that's not going to bode well for him. I mean, Ajit Kabial in 2017 used his movement and comfortably outboxed Derek Chisora. And I've discussed this on Patreon in a video just the other day or week. Sort of seems to be like a lot of fans want to go, yeah, but Chisora wasn't training himself. Wasn't training, he wasn't motivated, and, all this sort of stuff. It's like reinventing that he was never up for fights and, head wasn't in the game and all this sort of stuff, sort of explaining away all the losses and, to different guys. But some of these things you can't really pick and choose, though. I mean, if he's got 9 losses, he's got 9 losses. It's indicative that maybe he just wasn't good enough. So I think this whole Derek War Chisora thing, it's one of the best marketing type campaigns that you could hope for. It's got so many people believing that he's just a new man. I mean, and remembering he was knocked out just over a year ago against Dillian White. And people forget that he fought Senad Gashi and looked dreadful in that fight, couldn't cut the ring off and all sorts. So wins over Spilka and Price has got a lot of people gassed up on Chisora. And he can be in some really fun fights, and we've seen that, but you got to be standing right there in front of him most of the time. So Sam says Ajagba looks scary to begin with, not so much now, needs to improve on his skills. I guess against the likes of some of the fodder he was facing early on, the 1-2 and some of what he was doing, and with the power, because it's clear he's got big power, it does lend itself to great knockouts, and that helped build his name. And obviously he stepped up through some of the levels, some of the better fights that he should be having at this point in his career for his current prospect phase, and he's not looking as sharp. But for me, that sort of indicates that he's getting some of the tests and the right fights at the right time to push him to improve. So, I do agree with you. He needs to improve on his skills, and he clearly believes now that he has to do and much better than he has. Maybe he had been in love with his power in some of the earlier fights, but the hype and the buzz has come off a bit. But I still think he can do something in the division. I mean, people that write him off completely, I think that you do so at your peril. So Ra Hoa says, wonder what odds I could get for Povetkin, Pulev, Helenius, and Chisora all to cause the upset. Probably pretty good odds, I'd imagine. you can make a case that all four would lose those fights. But I would say, on the balance of probabilities, there'll be one upset in the four. Not sure what it would be. So Ayup says Miller keeps going because of all the drugs. I won't comment on that because, you know, someone might sue me. But it will be interesting to see Miller on his return. And if he goes rounds, how does he look in it? Is the gas tank going to be the same? That's all I'll say on that one. So Lubuck says the USA has very little talent coming through at heavyweight and not good for boxing. I mean, I always say that when, you know, boxing in the United States is strong, that it's good for the sport more broadly. And clearly still a lot of money in the sport in the USA. I mean, there is some heavyweights coming through, but no one for me that's sort of standing out at this point as the next heir apparent for, you know, to win a heavyweight title and dominate for any length of time. I mean, sure, you have some guys floating around, you know, not named Deontay Wilder, who are, you know, Michael Hunter, Jarrell Miller, that sort of stuff. But we're not really talking about that sort of guy, because most of those guys are, you know, we know what they are to a large extent. They might be able to win a title or something, but there's no real one guy that I think people are pinning hopes on to be a dominant champion or anything like that. I mean, there's some prospects that look okay, but a lot of the options now, that some guys who might have turned to boxing are going elsewhere. So it's kind of just what it is. I mean, boxing has become a niche sport over time in many countries. I mean, it's a very niche sport where I am, and, you know, I've almost got no one that I can talk to, you know, friends, family, that has any idea beyond, oh, did you watch, you know, the Joseph Parker fight, or did you watch that big fight? You know, most people, you know, where I am, casual fans, definitely. So definitely, you know, we are a smaller breed than we once were in terms of being, you know, massive fans of the sport. And the fact that you're here watching the stream, you know, tells me that, you know, you have a love for the sport and you want to talk boxing. And that's great. I love it. And, yeah, I guess the live stream as well, it's an opportunity once a week to, you know, have a bit of back and forth, and obviously a bit of back and forth in the comment section between each other, different fans too. But yeah, no, I'm enjoying doing these live streams, and yeah, we'll try to kick it up a gear this year. I'll try to work out some of the technology and other bits and pieces. I don't know where the chat window got. It should be up on the screen. I didn't change anything. I have no idea what happened. So we'll get back to the comment section. So Hardline Boxing Talk says some big heavyweight fights coming. Joshua Pulev, Wilder Fury 3, Chisora Usyk, White Povetkin. Can't wait. Yeah, it's going to be a good few months. And also add in there Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois. These are some of the bigger fights. But it's kind of, yeah, it feels like it's feast or famine, that you have certain fights that are a certain level, and then everyone else is fighting an overmatched opponent. It's like a real drop-off at points. But it's going to be an expensive time for the fan with all these pay-per-views coming up. So AZ says Ajagba is slow and stiff. And this is something Ronnie Shields is trying to sort of, you know, beat out of him. But I guess, you know, are some of his habits too ingrained? So Will Magic Man says, salute Boxing Squid. Please, no more picture of the shellless tortoises. Those guys put me off my food. Yeah, so you're referring to, I had up in a video for, what was it? It was Oscar Rivas. His fight was Devin Vargas. There was a picture up of Victor Bisbal and Devin Vargas, of which I can't remember if it was Will who said, or someone else, that they looked like shellless tortoises without their shirts on. And obviously Victor Bisbal is a healthy looking lad in terms of the waistline. Hardline Boxing Talk says, I hope we get to see Parker Hunter. That would be a great matchup as well. Yeah, I mean, out of all the options that are sort of been floating around, that's the one I prefer. And there was Billy Nelson talking about potentially Parker and Bacoli. But I think at this point, in terms of Bacoli, what risk reward, and sort of maybe doesn't bring enough to the table where they'd sort of go, yeah, we want to have that fight. But Hunter's done enough now in the heavyweight division where he's sort of shaking that cruiserweight tag, and people are sort of looking at him as a legit guy in the heavyweight division. Obviously beat Martin Bacoli, the draw with Alexander Povetkin, dominated Sergey Kuzmin. You know, he's, you know, put up a good effort in the past 18 to, 24 months, after not really coming into the division with much fanfare at all. So Brian says it's all about rugby, racing and cricket in New Zealand. Is it so much about racing anymore? I mean, that sort of, to me, seems like it's been a fringe sport for, some time. So John Otter says, draw, both are live. Alfonso has been terrible. Actually, yeah, I'll just get back to the couple of other fights on that card before I forget. So yeah, you've got Robert Alfonso versus Carlos Negron. That's on the undercard of the Kovnarski-Helenius card. So that is a fight. I'm actually, even though Alfonso is the house fighter, as it were, I've seen enough of Carlos Negron where I sort of think, he's going to win that fight. As Unger just pointed out, Alfonso has looked terrible. And Carlos Negron, when he fought Dominic Brazil, was it a year and a bit ago, whatever it was, I actually thought, because he's a big unit. He's, 6'6", 6'7", former Olympian as well, Carlos Negron. And yeah, he looked decent. Ultimately got caught with a big shot. But yeah, I haven't really been impressed by Robert Alfonso. But, I'm open for him to change my mind. But I believe that fight is not being televised. So in terms of the main card, which is Kovnarski-Helenius, Ajagba Kajanu, and then you have Frank Sanchez-Foray and Joey DeWeco. So that is the third fight, Frank Sanchez-Foray versus Joey DeWeco. And I was listening to a DeWeco interview on, I think it was IFL, or it was one of the main ones that does it. And he's very bullish about the knockout. He says that Frank Sanchez is just not very good, and he believes he can stop him. I'm leaning towards Sanchez. He is the guy on the rise, 14-0. He's actually a decent fighter, but he had a bit of a stinker last time out. So, but that was his last fight. He sort of stepped into on a few weeks' notice. Was it against Jack Murawayi, I think? And didn't look great, sort of laboured a little bit, but Joey DeWeco feels he's got the beating of him. And Joey DeWeco is one of these sort of gatekeeper type fighters that, if you're not good enough, he can beat you. But, it'll be interesting to see Foray, also Robert Alfonso, guys that are coming up that, sort of a bit hit and miss so far in terms of performances. And Alfonso, he's just been in Deontay Wilder's most recent camp. And I think Frank Sanchez was actually sparring Kajanu actually just recently too. I've got a picture of that somewhere too. So it's an interesting card. I mean, it's not a blockbuster in terms of the fights being, huge fights or, 50-50s. But there's some questions, can Ajagba show improvement against Kajanu? And if he gets a brutal knockout, is it going to revive a little bit of hype back into his career after, 2019? Some of that just sort of come off after the Kaladze and Demirezian fights. And then Kovnarski obviously beating Robert Helenius. If he does that in style, well, it'll confirm that Robert Helenius is pretty much done and probably shouldn't have been in this fight if he gets sparked early. But if he struggles to any extent, Kovnarski, people will be asking questions, because this is, at this point, a bit of a cherry-pick, stay-busy type fight. They've brought him in for the name recognition. He's been around for a long time. But there is the potential, Robert Helenius might be able to do something with the big right hand, height in the reach. But yeah, Kovnarski, F.A. Jack, but there's questions. And with these prospects, Sanchez and Alfonso, I've got big question marks about how good they really are. And they'll want to sort of prove that they're more than just sort of mid-tier fodder. But yeah, Negron, I'm sort of picking him for the upset. I don't know if there's any odds on that fight, but I'd be interested. I think that's a pretty evenly matched sort of fight. Frank Sanchez against Joey DeWeco. I mean, if Sanchez is using his height and his reach over the smaller man, he should be able to at least get a decision. I mean, DeWeco is tough. So, I mean, I'd be surprised if they ended in a knockout to Frank Sanchez-Foray. I think he will end up getting some sort of decision. I believe it's 10 rounds. So just have a look at my list here. So I think we covered pretty much everything on it. But we'll, still got Manuel Charr versus Trevor Bryan. We'll come to that in a moment because, I want to talk about that. But I'll just get to the chat and we'll catch up on where we were. Just a sec, I'll just have a drink. Almost 2 hours deep here. It's good. This week we don't have those sort of bots that are coming in, talking about, go to our live show at da-da-da-da-da. Haven't seen as much of that, so that is good. So Hardline Boxing Took says, yeah, Joyce versus Dubois, another great matchup. Lubak says, completely agree. Ajagba needs to develop his lateral movement and set up more traps and not just walk forward like a mummy. Yeah, I think some of what he's going to do, he's a work in progress, but I think at this point, he's going to only develop so far. I mean, I don't see him as a guy who's just going to be bouncing around on his balls of his feet, finding angles from, strange places. He is going to be some sort of come forward looking a little bit flat-footed, a little bit stiff. But if he can start moving his head a bit more, and if the footwork can improve, that will open up some opportunities. So Danny says, straight up Boxing Squared, it's lonely being a New Zealand boxing fan. Yeah, it certainly is. Certainly is. I mean, if you ask, people in New Zealand who's the heavyweight champion, probably half of them are still going to say Mike Tyson. I mean, that's the sort of, boxing, knowledge within, just the general public. But I guess that's probably the same in a lot of places. If you were in a taxi and someone didn't know boxing at all, who's the heavyweight champion? They'll probably still say Mike Tyson, even though that was, 25 years ago? So Peter says the UK, New Zealand and Canada should have free movement of people like a union. Okay. Haven't really thought about that. I wouldn't mind that, but, tickets are expensive. It's a lonely place being on this side of the world to get cheap tickets. To go to the UK, it's, round trip, it's a couple of grand. It's, it's not like $100 or $500. It's expensive. So Anthony says, Hunter is interesting and reminds me of McCall. Yeah, I mean, through 2019, I wanted to see more from Hunter, and we eventually got it. But I guess the reverse side to the fight against Alexander Povetkin. Obviously, Hunter didn't lose it. It was a draw, a very good fight. A lot of people picked it, that some people thought Hunter won. Some people thought Povetkin won. But I guess you might be able to sort of say, because he didn't beat Povetkin, a guy who was 40 at the time, does that raise any red flags? I mean, I don't think people have really sort of discussed this. I mean, I sort of thought, yeah, it was a great fight. I really enjoyed it. But until now, I haven't really sort of put too much more thought into, because obviously a lot of people aren't really sort of talking about Hunter in terms of wanting to fight him. No one's really calling him out. He's saying himself that he's a boogeyman, etc. But is he really? And, if he is sort of getting a draw with Povetkin at this point, where does that really place him in the division? Because most people seem to be picking Dillian Whyte to knock out Alexander Povetkin, so yeah, it's a question. So Brian says, you're probably right about racing. I've been away for 30 years, probably rugby sevens now. Nah, rugby sevens is not, like the Wellington tournament, when it was the Wellington tournament, was popular for like about 15 years. It was really popular. But the last few years, it really struggled. And then, it's gone to Hamilton. And I think this year, I saw some photos of the stands and it was only like half full. There's just so many options for entertainment these days. And, it's not just there's, some big sport on and nothing else. There's, a lot of other things. And, that's the world over. There's a lot more these days than there ever was, say, 10 years ago, and technology has opened things up too. So Rohowa says, Hunter gave Usyk a good fight. I think he'd be competitive versus Parker. Just a sec. Yeah, I think it would be competitive. Be interesting, because I think those early rounds would be extremely tight. Hunter, a good mover like Parker, it would be, them sort of having a bit of a box off and tight rounds, I'd imagine. But I guess the question for me is, if Joseph Parker couldn't hurt him early on, couldn't really sort of build up a big lead early on, what would happen in the mid rounds? Because Joseph Parker tends to go into a bit of a energy conservation mode through the mid rounds. He does work less, and that is obviously to preserve energy, especially if he feels like this is going to go the distance. There was a question just in the Winters fight. He was clearly sort of blowing in the big ones just in the 5th round. he'd put a lot of effort into some of those earlier rounds. But yeah, it's always been, I mean, some people say, oh, he hasn't got a stamina issue, but for me, he's always looked like he conserves energy in the mid rounds, you know, knowing that he's probably going to have some spurts later on to win rounds and see out the fight. So if the fight sort of played out like that, tight early rounds, and then, you know, maybe split them first 4, 5 rounds, 6 rounds, but then Parker sort of went and, you know, dropped a couple of rounds through, you know, lower output. Yeah, it could be interesting. But, you know, both good boxers, both good movers, and both, you know, got good power. I mean, Hunter, you know, hurt Povetkin, Hunter hurt Kuzmin, you know, so he can crack. So Sizzler says he wants to see Hunter and Ruiz. That's a good fight. Lubak says Kovnatski needs to fight at 245 pounds. Yeah, I think sub 250 is going to be good for him. AZ says Sanchez is a cruiserweight, no size or power. And I think this is some of the stuff that Deweko is sort of picking up on. He likes his chances. He said when he was up close and personal, he's like, yeah, you know, this guy isn't going to beat me. I'm going to knock him out. And if he does knock him out, you know, Frank Sanchez probably disappears into the ether. Ungus says, Rojo, well, that fight wasn't even close. An urban myth. People only watching a 2-minute clip think Hunter troubled him. Usyk won wide. So Scott70 says, Lovejoy has just posted that he has been ranked at number 10 by the WBC. I've been checking the rankings for both the IBF and WBC. WBC, because obviously Fury's the new champ. How would things go? I'm just going to check that right now, Mr. Scott70. Just a second. Been waiting on this. He's sure it's not that post. He had one with the WBA, and it was from 2018. It's like a side-by-side shot, and he said he was going to frame it. And I'm pretty sure it was from some point August last year. Yeah, so no update to the WBC. Yeah, no, I saw a post maybe, is it a day old or at least earlier today, and it was like side by side, a photo of him on the right, and then there was a rankings list. He was 10, and I'm pretty sure it was the WBA. But if it is the WBC, that would shock me, just because he's been doing nothing. I mean, he's barely been fighting the past 2 years, and he must be providing several brown envelopes across the place. And he's got no real backing. He's been fighting down in Tijuana. And actually, speaking of Christopher Lovejoy, I did, when I was talking to Johnny Rice via social media to sort of tee up him to give a clip for my video for the Dempsey McKean versus Johnny Rice preview video. I asked him, I said, you sparred with Lovejoy recently, didn't you? And he said, yep. And I said, was he any good? I said, it's really hard to get a read on him. And he actually said, you know, he is actually pretty good. And that he's dedicating himself to the sport. So, yeah, so a fellow pro saying that Lovejoy's got a bit of something about him. I thought, you know, well, it'd be good to see him in a fight at some point, because he's this total enigma in the heavyweight division. Okay, I'm just catching up on the chat here. So Danny says the Fun Police ruined Sevens in Wellington. Lubak, have to bail Boxing Squared, but excellent stream as always. Thank you for joining us, and good night or good day wherever you are. So UK Rob Boxing, Povetkin was denied a knockdown. Ropes held up Hunter in that fight. I felt Povetkin just took that. Fact. Got to finish everything with a fact. I shaded it to Povetkin as well. I thought he did just enough, but it was a close fight. I wasn't mad that it was a draw. If anything, I wanted to see it again. They should have done it again. So Unger says Mike Hunter the same level as his dad was. Metal Box J says White versus Povetkin's got happy days. Be interesting to see the level of the ticket sales. Just on the back of a couple of things. Obviously, some of Dillian White's 2019, I should say, was spoiled by the UCAD situation. Is any mud gonna stick? And also, he looked dreadful in the fight against Marius Wok. You know, he really made Wok like he's still got something about him. And, you know, Wok is pretty shot. I mean, people forget that Martin Bacoli beat the guy up badly less than a year ago. And he's lost to others in the past couple of years as well. Just a second. So So God of War says Hunter was KO on his feet against Usyk. They should have stopped the fight. Yeah, he was all over the place later in the fight. Cash for Cat will wait for the Gypsy King to spank Wilder again first. Not sure. Ed Too Tall, the Takam fight changed Parker where he gassed trying to knock him out. Yeah, it's interesting because that flurry was that was almost like a trademark sort of Parker move where he would get a fighter hurt. And if you didn't follow a lot of Joseph Parker's earlier career, and for a lot of people outside of New Zealand, you probably didn't see these overpriced pay-per-views against mostly journeymen with, journeymen in waiting, I would call them, because some of them now have like losses galore on their records. But at the time, it might have been like 15-2 or 16-1, that sort of stuff. But he would have this trademark flurry where he would wind up to take a guy out, a massive sort of combinations, just raining punches down and, get the guy out of there. And then he did that against Carlos Takam. And yeah, he gassed badly. And we really haven't ever seen him do the whole sort of that wind up as he used to do in his earlier days. And Takam was able to, I think it was even in the same round, put it on him, and it took him a round or two to really sort of get the win back in him. So Saul Farah is the GOAT says, metal box, that's trash, don't lie. Oh, okay, that's in reference to a comment that White versus Povetkin and Katie versus Serrano is tremendous bargain. What are the tickets going for that fight in terms of the cost? Is it reasonable? Obviously, I'm not going. I haven't really sort of checked the ticket prices. Unga says 100 Parker always takes the mid-rounds off every single fight. And I think it's a bit of a sore point too for, a few people in the Parker camp. Kevin Barry's been asked about it before, and he doesn't like the suggestion that Parker's taking rounds off, but yeah, he does. And in big fights, you can argue in the Dillian White fight, the Anthony Joshua fight, both of those, there was an element of didn't do enough in the mid rounds, and ultimately against White, where obviously he battled back from being a head clash, getting knocked down. He, if he'd have done a little bit more through rounds, was it 6 to 8, could have got that fight. It was very close in the end. Rahua says, yeah, Parker tried to take him out in the 8th. He was on the back foot, just about staying out of range, but Takam was unable to capitalize. He didn't and doesn't throw enough punches. Danny Tanner says, absolute scenes when Lovejoy bamboozles Fury for all the belts. Yeah. I actually saw a post from Christopher Lovejoy. This was after the loss, and he had Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, and Deontay Wilder in a grid, 4, and he had his photo, and the caption was, and if you go to his Instagram, I just cracked up. It had something like, I'm still the only unbeaten one in this. It was basically saying that, he was, better than them. Yeah. The guy is just, he does throw up a lot of laughs. It'd be great to see him in an actual fight. There was that one he was meant to have in February, but it never happened. It was going to be in Vegas, and yeah, I don't know. He took some sort of fight again in Tijuana, and yeah, it's he does provide a lot of entertainment, Christopher Lovejoy, more than his actual boxing output, remembering that he had all these low-level fights in Tijuana, and then it went pretty quiet in 2019 when he got ranked and just had one fight. So UK Rob says, Taylor Serrano now official for the white card will really help out ticket sales. Yep, probably will. They need to have a strong undercard to sort of help the pay-per-view. A lot of people not quite, sort of like, is this pay-per-view, is it not? But it's always going to be on pay-per-view. It just kind of is the reality at the moment. Dillian White's in the Dillian White pay-per-view business, and he's probably going to get somewhere 350,000 buys, something like that for this one. If the Rivas fight did 289, well, that was the estimate from the research board. This 350, I think it will do less than, I think Chisora was roughly 400 and Parker and White was about 450. something like that. So 350. I mean, what do you make of that? What's this going to do? If it did less than that, less than say 300, probably not good news for Dillian Whyte and his profile. So Danny says Parker versus Takam was a really good fight, definition of a learning fight. Yeah, and even at that point, I mean, Carlos Takam, I think, was 35, and I mean, I don't know if he was ever the same after the Povetkin fight. Yeah, I sort of think from that point he was sort of a gradual decline, and it cracks me up when the Star Boxing press releases the way that they talk about him, because he signed on to Star Boxing on he signed to them, and then he signed a co-promotional deal with the Top Rank and ESPN. But you would think that he is like one fight away from a title, and the way that they talk about it is just, yeah, it's hilarious. Benjo says Ruiz wants a tune-up, i.e. weight loss camp. I mean, that's part of the reason that I think he's going to end up fighting Areola, because if he ends up taking... He says a tune-up, but then if he walked into a Kovnatsky fight, which is a name that's being mentioned, yeah, I can't see it. I think it's going to be the easier of the two, and they need to, if they're going to do the Areola fight, if you don't do it now, it probably never happens. So Metal Box J says 68 is the lowest price, up to hundreds. Taylor versus Serrano on the bill too. Yeah, I mean, what is the appetite at the moment for women's boxing in the UK? I mean, honest question here. I mean, I'm keen to know, because for me, I mean, I watch some of these fights. Some of them, are not that good. I mean, Katie Taylor's been in some good fights. But, the addition for me, if I was there, of Taylor Serrano, that would do nothing for me in terms of, buying a ticket. But does that sway you? I mean, who else is going to be on this undercard too? Hopefully not Lawrence Okoli. I know there's been a little bit of talk about that, but I never want to see that guy fight again, He just sucks the air right out of the building. But yeah, I mean, I'm just interested in the question of where are you now at as a fan with women's boxing? Has some of what's gone on in the past few years, more fights and there's been a bit more profile, has that influenced you to, or increased your interest in women's sport, just women's boxing? Yeah, let me know. I mean, I really enjoyed that Katie Taylor and Delphine Persoon fight. I thought Persoon won, so I mean, it's boxing. It's always going to be a bit dodged on scorecards, but yeah, let me know about that. I'm quite interested. Wouldn't sort of influence me on buying a ticket, but Rob says White versus tickets are £40 up to 400 VIP. It's a big chunk of change. So Will says Ruiz mentioned he was advised against the Ortiz fight. As I heard it from Andy Ruiz Jr. in that interview on PBC, that was one of the options that he was mentioned, that was thrown out there. But he said he wanted a fight before that, and then he was asked, what, a tune-up fight? And he said yes. So, I mean, my indication is that Andy Ruiz Jr. just doesn't really want to fight Luis Ortiz, because if he did, you could have it next. I mean, what's the benefit of waiting another, basically a year to have that fight, and, Luis Ortiz being a year older? Fury should have an O on his record, says Will Magic Man, because he lost the first fight with McDermott back in 2009. Anyone else see that fight, and do you agree with my opinion? I actually just watched that McDermott interview that he did with IFL TV. It was really interesting, and sort of the talking up to the build-up, the second fight too. How he had glandular fever a few weeks out, and then there was a whole thing about the gloves and bits and pieces. He was ready to walk out, and he was sat in the car outside for half an hour. He wanted to drive off, and then he was threatened with being sued by Sky. And yeah, it was a really interesting watch. But he said he got to the 7th round, and because he'd sort of overtrained, but also the impact of being ill, he said he had nothing left. But he said it probably didn't matter, because Tyson Fury improved 10 times from the first fight. So Lee says, who's next for a Jagba? I think someone top 25. no massive rush. I don't think it'll be someone in the top 25. I think it's more likely top 75. Someone. I think there'll be a few more Razvan Kajanu types. He clearly needs a little bit more in terms of his development. I don't think it's because when you start talking top 25, you're talking the likes of Charles Martin, Marco Hook, Christian Hammer, that sort of level. I don't think it's going to be that this year. I think they're going to give him the rest of the year fighting guys, maybe top 50 to top 75 in that range. Maybe there'll be one like an Eric Molina or something like that at the end of the year. But yeah, I think they're going to just, after what happened in 2019 and he's developing, they're going to go, just put the brakes on just a little bit. So Benjo says, for me, the lack of power, the girls mean I don't watch it much. Yeah, I think, for a lot of fans, knockouts do matter, and there's often not a lot of knockouts in women's boxing, and sometimes the skill level too. I mean, it seems to be the divisions, there's one or two really good fighters in each. So sometimes the good matchups, like a Taylor Pursoon, few and far between. But there's definitely been some fights where I thought, oh yeah, that was a good scrap, but there's just not enough of it. So Rahowa says, he definitely lost. The BBOC changed the rule about refs judging English title fights. After that, it was a 3-man judging panel, had the whole whiff of corruption. Will Magic Man says Pursoon definitely won that fight. Well, I was surprised she didn't get the decision, but then I guess not surprised. Unga says, yep, McDermott hard done by. AZ says Ruiz ducked White. White is the real boogeyman. Are you trolling there? I mean, he walked away from a number of eliminators and didn't take the Joshua fight in April 2019. I mean, Dillian White does deserve a title shot, but he hasn't. It's not like he hasn't had opportunities either. He's prioritized money, pay-per-view fights, over taking some eliminators. And, he said he's willing to fight anywhere. He said, I've been to Saudi Arabia, I've been to the United States, I've fought in Hull. But he didn't fight in Bulgaria where, they lost the purse bid and decided, okay, well, we didn't get the fight where we wanted it. Probably not for the money that they wanted it to. And ended up going to fight Joseph Parker. And I'm not saying that wasn't a great fight and a good fight to take, but, it's got to keep it even on some of these statements too. Some of the narrative that White's been hard done by is they have walked away from fights too to take pay-per-view fights, with Rivas, with also Derek Chisora and Joseph Parker. Could have taken other fights. I did see someone say that the WBC mandated that White fight Rivas, but they made the fight and then asked for it to be on the line, so there is a difference there. So liberalism is a cult, says Lee Scorpius. I've lost my faith in F.A. Jagba a few fights ago. I really hope he makes the appropriate changes to his game, but I don't think he will. Yeah, well, time will tell. I mean, there's always going to be some prospects, that don't end up panning out for whatever reason. I mean, remember some of the hype about some of the guys from days gone by. I mean, Audley Harrison, I guess, is an example. But, maybe F.A. Jagba, out of these, half a dozen guys that were picked as, big-time prospects coming through, maybe he will be one of the ones that falls off. Some of these other guys might, get ravaged by injury or have other bad luck or whatever in their life or career. It might not realize their potential. I mean, I was talking about Robert Helenius earlier. He's a guy that big raps on him coming through, that he could be someone who could be dominant. Never happened. John says, does Huey Fury KO Pavel Sauer? I think so. I think he's going to, because Franklin, when he fought Sauer, it's like he could only fight at a certain pace and throw so many punches. He'd hurt Sauer a lot, but just wouldn't follow up with a flurry of punches to end it, which looked like it was there. I think Fury, if he gets Sauer hurt, is going to follow up, and he's probably got a better gas tank and more variation of punches than Franklin to get it done. Franklin can just sort of fight at the one speed, and that didn't help him in the Sauer fight. He dropped him a couple of times, but I think Fury might do it, maybe 4 to 6 rounds, something like that. I don't think it's going to be a first round knockout like Filip Hrgović got, but if it is, impressive for Fury. So Lee Scorpius says, what's your feeling on all these ridiculous reasons for Wilder's loss? Fury Glovegate, Wilder not well. Do you get annoyed that some boxers just can't take defeat? Accepting a loss is a way to move on. Yeah, we sort of traversed this a little bit earlier. I think some of it's sort of got a bit ridiculous now. But I guess it's, it's going to help build up the third fight. But yeah, some of the more recent posts from Deontay Wilder, there was one this week that I covered off in one of my heavyweight news mashup videos. He effectively put up the sort of post that he should have put up after the fight, as opposed to, the long list of excuses. The ref favored Fury. The costume was too heavy, it weakened my legs, and yada yada yada. And Anthony Jarrell influenced my corner. My corner shouldn't have thrown in the towel. I was in the fight, etc. There was a post where it was more classy, and it was the sort of stuff, it reflects he's moving on, which is a good thing. But some of all this stuff, what it could do is help build the third fight, which in itself, Fury's got a lot of ammunition he can use in terms of the sort of mental warfare that he might want to sort of inflict on Wilder in the build-up. And I could totally see him coming in wearing a very similar looking costume at the first press conference, or at some point in fight week. There's going to be some things he's going to say and do that he's holding back at the moment, that he's going to use against Deontay Wilder to try and get under his skin. And if he can get him off his game plan like he did in the first fight, all the better for Tyson Fury. So Unger says he's predicting another lackluster points win for Hughie Fury, and Peter left wishing Tyson was his son. If it is a lackluster points decision, it's not going to do anything for Hughie Fury's stock, which is right down with fans at the moment. There's not too many people calling out for Hughie Fury fights at the moment. And even if he wins and it is a lackluster points decision, he's going to come straight out and say he wants a rematch with Parker, with Pulev, with Povetkin, that he's healthy now, and yada, yada, yada. UK Rob says 3-minute rounds would create better women's fights. Yeah, probably lead to more knockouts too. And I understand, I saw Dan Raphael tweet something about this, that there is some commissions where you can have 3-minute rounds, but it's just not exercised very often. I think if there was 3-minute rounds and some fighters getting tired, that could lead to some more knockouts, which could be more exciting. But then again, I think safety has been cited before as an issue in having it for 2-minute rounds. Just a sec. So God of War says White would have lost his WBC ranking if he took the AJ fight. You can't blame them for that. Well, as I understand it from White himself, the reason he didn't take that Joshua fight, which was for 3 belts, not 1, was he didn't like his cut in a rematch clause. So he didn't like the terms of if he beat Joshua, how much he would make, that Joshua would still be making more. You can't say that you haven't had a title shot, because you've been sort of blocked at every path. That's effectively what White says. But he's turned down Pulev, he turned down Ortiz and Eliminators, he turned down Joshua for 3 belts at Wembley. And part of that was because of the rematch clause and the amount he would get. He's, had opportunities. Some of the narrative, I think, that they sort of spin for White is maybe beyond really what's actually happened. But, he's a prize fighter. He's, trying to get the biggest paydays possible. Parker, Chisora, and Rivas, they've made him a lot of money. So you got to say he's a very good businessman for doing what he's done. And then obviously trying to create a narrative that he's been hard done by. And a lot of people, have sort of, they believe what he's saying, that he has been hard done by. And sure, there's a few things you can point to that Deontay Wilder, sort of said he'd wait him out and wanted him to fight Luis Ortiz before he'd give him a shot, etc. But you can't say he hasn't had other opportunities elsewhere, I should say. Yeah, it's 11:59, obviously starting to get a little bit tired here. So I'll wrap it up in a minute or two. I'll just try and get through as many of the comments as I can. Final sort of comments coming in. 70 in the chat. Thank you for being here. We'll go for another 3 minutes to round it out to 2 minutes 30. Where are we? David Price was thought at one time to be a challenger to Klitschko. Yeah, that's another good example. There's a lot of examples over over the years that just don't sort of pan out for whatever reason. And actually, there was, I think, a tweet from Eli Seck back from like 2013 where he said that Tyson Fury wouldn't beat anyone in the top. Yeah, it was some sort of derogatory tweet which did not age well. Benjo says, Huey just doesn't have the spite, the sadism that even Tyson has. I don't see Huey licking blood. Yeah, fair point. Yeah, I mean, he never seems, I mean, maybe it's his demeanor and just how he is, but he never seems that excited about being in the heavyweight division. And yeah, I don't know. Is he continuing to train with his dad out of loyalty? I mean, could he, go somewhere else and improve? I don't know. I mean, Tyson Fury, he's changed his lot, but you have to give Peter Fury a lot of credit for some of the stuff he instilled in Tyson Fury. I don't ever see Huey Fury leaving his father, but I mean, at some point where he steps up and keeps getting beaten at world level, you have to ask these sorts of questions. He's already had 3 fights at world level and lost them all. And at some point, you can't say, well, he's still a young heavyweight, because at some point that won't be true. Cash for Cat says Price beat Fury in the amateurs. Yes, he did. They talked about having that fight in the pros, never quite happened. I wouldn't have minded seeing that as one of his warm-up fights, either in like 2018 when he first came back, or even last year, just for some of the backstory. So Benjo says White did want Pulev, I think, but not in Bulgaria. Pulev apparently a massive celebrity there, so White might have been screwed on the cards. Yeah, I mean, there's always the possibility of that, but what if Eddie Hearn had won the purse bid? You could say the reverse is true, that White's popular in the UK and Pulev might have been screwed on the cards. I mean, but if you're going to talk about you'll fight anyone anywhere in the world, but you didn't want to go to Bulgaria because the money wasn't great. It's not a great look when people sort of examine the statements. Rahowa says, if Chisora takes a bad loss to Usyk, he should fight Price. He did fight Price. He beat him, remember? Liberalism is a cult says, I watched the Wilder Fury fight 7 times. How about you guys? 7 times? Which one? One or the rematch? I think I've watched it about 3 times. Okay, I'll just flick down to the bottom here. Lee Scorpio says, really enjoy your coverage, always listen, and a huge fan from England. Keep up the great content. Thank you for that, Lee. And I've also noticed on your Twitter feed, I think you've got a bit of a crush on Shannon Courtenay there. Yeah, it's obviously from the same place. Watford, is it, I think? So Cash for Cat says Naz would be a great commentator. Nazim Hamid. He does do a bit of commentating. Where are we here in the chat? Huey is 26, just a baby. Cash for Cat says, thanks Boxing Squared. Great show as usual. Chat again Friday, hopefully. And on that note, 2 hours 30 in, I'll wrap it up. Apologies if I didn't get to your comment. Chat moves pretty quickly. I had to sort of abandon different sections just to keep up with it. But appreciate you joining me once again. 70 in the building. Thank you one and all. Morning, noon or night, wherever you are. Hope you're having a great day or evening, or whatever the case may be. And we'll be back here next week. So enjoy the fights this weekend. Outside of some of the heavyweight fights, not a lot on. Big UFC card on as well. Israel Adesanya, the New Zealander, is in that one. But we shall catch you next week. Take care.